Chapter 1199. I don't know if it's a coincidence or not. I only know that you're in a very dangerous situation. Ling Xiao shook his head and said coldly. This incident seemed to confirm what he said before. The human race always liked to cheat and scheme against each other. In the end, not only did they lose their position, but they also lost their fortune and couldn't get back up. Aside from Su Shan, is there no other talented person in the Su family? Young master, you're right. The current young master of the Su family is called Su Yu. He's a good-for-nothing. Other than flirting and idling, he has no other hobbies. Hua Mingxi smiled bitterly. Her eyes were filled with disgust. So it's like that. I wonder, how can I help Mingxi? Ling Xiao nodded and asked casually. Young master. Hearing this, the gloominess on Hua Mingxi's face was swept away, replaced by a strong sense of joy. Ever since Ling Xiao came to Dao Sky City, she had been trying to please the young master of the Ling people. Now it seemed that everything was worth it. As long as Ling Xiao was willing to be her backer, not to mention the Ling clan's background, just his popularity in the Azure world was enough for Hua Mingxi to have the confidence to deal with the little god of wealth of the Lu clan. After all, being the young master of the Merchant Alliance was one thing. More importantly, he had to bring real benefits to the Merchant Alliance. Popularity was the most important thing. I don't want anything you can do for me. As long as you're willing to be my backer, I'll do whatever you want. Hua Mingxi blushed. Her tone was full of meaning. And Ling Xiao raised his hand and finished the tea in his cup. However, if you want to go against the Lu family, the first thing you need to do is to help the Su family regain their prestige. The rest can only be done slowly. Ling Xiao didn't say anything else. He got up and walked out of the hall. As for Zhang Juji, I'll help you suppress it. Thank you, young master. Hua Mingxi's eyes trembled. She got up and bowed at the departing figure. With Hua Mingxi's temperament, there was no need for Ling Xiao to say anything. She would make her own decision. And what Ling Xiao wanted to do was to help her find a truly outstanding young master for the Su family. Now that the Su family's foundation had been lost, a successor might not be able to affect the overall situation, but to Hua Mingxi, it was an extremely good helper. It was a setup. If it was too deliberate, people would have misgivings about it. Following the logical order was the essence of it. There was only 1 year left before the world of souls showed up. The reason why Ling Xiao spent so much effort to plot against Hua Mingxi was because, when he returned to the Ling people, he already knew from the ancient scroll that the 13th ancestor had given him that there was a direct descendant of the Su clan in that world. With the secret help of the Hua family's young master, Ling Xiao believed that the Su family would soon welcome a new upheaval. Now, apart from Yi Qinchan, the Daughters of Destiny by Ling Xiao's side had almost never shown up. In the entire Azure world, no one knew about their relationship with Ling Xiao, and he only needed to arrange new identities for the girls and control their own power. At the crucial moment, there might be unexpected surprises. It was not until Ling Xiao's figure disappeared that Hua Mingxi's respectful expression froze. How could it be easy to restore the prestige of the Su family? However, since the Lu family could find a little god of wealth from the lower bound, perhaps she could also secretly find a new successor for the Su family. Thinking of this, Hua Mingxi's lips curled into a cold smile. Fortunately, after planning for a long time, the young master of the Ling people's attitude towards her had changed a little. With Ling Xiao's words, she could follow her plan and set up the Merchant Alliance to suppress the Lu family. The word fake in the fox assuming the tiger's might was really broad and profound. On the other side, when Ling Xiao walked out of the Merchant Alliance, Folded Shadow's voice sounded in his mind. Master, I have followed your instructions and placed the spiritual talisman in the barren mountain outside the Dao Sky City. Okay, Folded Shadow, go and find out that the young master of the Su family, Su Shan, was robbed and killed by some villains. These villains, where did they come from and where are they now? Ling Zhao's expression was indifferent and his eyes were full of coldness. Back then, Su Shan's accidental death was known by everyone in the Azure world. However, even with the foundation of the Heaven Saint Merchant Alliance, they could not find this group of people to avenge Su Shan. Was this reasonable? According to Ling Zhao's guess, this matter was either caused by the Lu family or this group of villains might have a great background. Even with the Heaven Saint Merchant Alliance's strength, they did not dare to confront them head-on. No matter what, it should not be too difficult to find this group of people. Yes, Master. Inoue, you can go and get the spiritual talisman now, Ling Xiao indifferently said. He took a step forward and disappeared from where he stood. Domain, Heavenly Palace. Phoenix Rouge, Su Yan, and the others gathered around Ziyan. They all had joyful expressions on their faces. Sister Ziyan, when did you return? Sensing the terrifying energy fluctuations coming from the Sea Emperor of the lower realm, even Phoenix Rouge had a surprised expression on her face. It seemed like she had to work hard on her cultivation. Otherwise, if there came a day when she could no longer see her young master's back, her immortal path would come to an end. Buzz. Just as the three women were talking, Ling Xiao suddenly descended from the sky and landed in front of them. He had a gentle smile on his face. The current situation in the Dao Sky City was developing according to his plan. With Yang Yuan and Zhang Juji, the two children of destiny, traveling with him, this trip to the Daotian Academy would definitely be very happy. Of course, whether they were happy or not was not something that Ling Xiao could control. Shouldn't the children of destiny face all kinds of dangers? Miserable, even more miserable. Only then can they awaken a new fortune and reach the peak of the world. We have always been serious about helping others. Young Master. Seeing the black-clothed figure descend from the sky, the three women's expressions turned solemn and they immediately bowed. Ziyan, come with me. Ling Xiao waved his hand, and Ziyan immediately returned to her original form. She jumped into his arms and flew into the distance. Young Master, did you find out Prime Greenwood's identity? Based on Ziyan's understanding of Ling Xiao, the reason why he was not in a hurry to kill Zhang Juji was because he wanted to find out the mysterious Prime behind him. Before coming here, Ziyan had asked the Lightning Master about Sovereign Qing Mu's origins. However, even the Lightning Master only knew that this monster's identity was terrifying and that he was proficient in divination. He did not know anything else. As Prime Greenwood's disciple, Hua Mingxi was now completely intimidated by her young master. Even without Ling Xiao saying anything, she would probably expose her background to prove her innocence. No, there's no hurry. Ling Xiao shook his head. This game of chess had to be played one piece at a time. Only then could he control the situation in an orderly manner. When the world of souls opened and Su Yan successfully entered the Heavenly Saint Business Alliance, Hua Mingxi would no longer have any value. At that time, he would open the demonic saber and search her soul. Everything would naturally come to light. Oh, young master, Prime Greenwood's origins are mysterious and is feared by the 10 races of the demon domain. According to my guess, there should be a true expert behind him. Ziyan's tone was grave. Although she had obtained her ancestors' inheritance, her cultivation had yet to reach the sage realm. In front of a heavenly sovereign, she had no power to speak of. Ziyan, help me do something when you return to the clan. Ling Xiao lowered his head and gently stroked Ziyan's back. I want you to use Zhang Juji's killing of Lei Yun as an excuse to throw the extreme south into chaos. Chapter 1200. Yes, young master. Ziyan smiled knowingly. She instantly understood Ling Zhao's intentions. In the extreme south, the 10 great demon clans ruled millions of miles of mountains and rivers. However, there had never been any major disputes among the demon clans in the past 100,000 years. The various clans defended their territories and were united against a common enemy. They could be said to be an iron plate, since Ling Xiao wanted to find Prime Qing Mu and control the Azure Sky world. The 10 clans could not be too comfortable. Only internal problems could prevent external problems. Only by causing the 10 clans to fall apart would Ling Xiao have the chance to set up the world. Tomorrow, invite Hua Mingxi to personally go to the Thunder Dragon clan and report the matter of Zhang Juji murdering Lei Yun and colluding with demons to the Thunder Lord. Then, guard the demon clan. If anything happens, report to me at any time. Ling Xiao descended from the sky with Ziyan in his arms. When the academy opened tomorrow, Zhang Juji would disguise himself and appear on the Dao Mountain. However, Hua Mingxi was his senior sister after all. Ling Xiao was not sure if she had a spiritual treasure that could distinguish between fellow disciples. Thus, only by taking her away from this place could it be considered foolproof. Tomorrow! Ziyan's eyes flashed with disappointment, but she did not dare to disobey. She could only nod with a gloomy expression. Yes. Dalong, it's time to take your medicine. In front of the medicine hall, several pill slaves held spiritual pills and poured them into the black tortoise crown prince's mouth. Seeing this scene, a smile immediately appeared on Ling Xiao's face. According to the law of history, Dalong should take his medicine. Master. Han Zhan and the others walked over from afar and bowed to Ling Xiao. How's the refining of the pills? Ling Xiao casually handed the cosmos bag filled with spiritual materials to Han Zhan. Master, more than 300 pills have been refined. Give them to me. Now that Ziyan was returning to the demon region, she naturally had to bring some spiritual treasures with her. Only then would it be easier to control people's hearts. With the Thunder Dragon clan as the foundation and Ling Xiao's secret support, a new emperor would appear in the extreme south very soon. Take these pills and spiritual treasures with you. Now that Lei Yun is dead, it is the best opportunity for you to take control of the Lightning Dragon tribe. I won't let you down. Ziyan's eyes trembled, like a pool of spring water flowing through the blue sea and blue sky. Yes. Suddenly, 10,000 soul runes flashed in Ling Xiao's eyes. As for Ziyan, she felt her body and mind relax, as if she had been freed. Beep, the daughter of Providence has submitted. Due to her low providence, the host has no reward. Now, this little wild cat already had some luck, and it was truly willing to submit. The soul imprint would only hinder her growth. Give her some space, and perhaps there would be an unexpected surprise. Of course, without the system notification, Ling Xiao would have just rearranged a soul seal. Throughout the night, the cats cried incessantly. On the second day, the entire Dao Heaven City fell into an uproar when the sun had just risen. Above the horizon, a golden mountain towered above the clouds. It was majestic, with flourishing divine trees. There were 5 colored rays of light that transformed into auspicious clouds, covering thousands of miles in the sky and overflowing with Taoist rhymes. Various laws intertwined into chains, divine colors gushed out, and auspicious birds soared into the sky. On the divine mountain, there was a long golden staircase that was like a path to heaven that descended straight down. There seemed to be immortal runes flowing on it, and it was dazzling and eye-catching. However, what was strange was that there was not a single figure on the mountain. At the end of the divine path, there was a white jade gate, and layers of divine light and immortal chains surged out from the gate. The Daotian Academy has finally opened. Outside Dao Heaven City, Ziyan stood with her hands behind her back. Her purple robe was loose and graceful. At this moment, her face had already recovered its usual arrogance and coldness, but there was a faint trace of worry between her brows. Miss Lei Yan, do you have to return to the extreme south today? Beside her, Hua Mingxi's eyes were cold, and her tone was rather helpless. Today was the grand occasion of the Azure Continent, the opening day of the Daotian Academy. But early in the morning, the eldest miss of the Lightning Dragon clan suddenly visited and asked her to return to the extreme south with her to report the matter of Zhang Juji killing Lei Yun. If it was in the past, Hua Mingxi would not refuse. After all, she had to do something to prove that she was not involved with Zhang Jiuji. But, Miss Lei Yan, can't we wait until the grand occasion is over before returning to the extreme south? After all, the young master had just shown a trace of affection for her, and now was the best opportunity to stabilize their relationship. If she left, Lei Yun is the young master of my clan. Now that she has been killed by an evil demon, I hope that Miss Hua can consider the feelings of my Lightning Dragon clan. If not for the visit of the Lord Ling Xiao yesterday, I would not want to delay any longer. Lei Yan's voice was calm as she turned to look at Hua Mingxi. Of course, Miss Hua can choose not to go, but the young master promised me with his Tao heart that Miss Hua will definitely return justice to my Lightning Dragon clan. Sigh. Miss Lei Yan, there's no need to say any more. Let's go. Hearing this, Hua Mingxi's eyes trembled, but she did not say anything else. The young master had already said that he would suppress this matter for her. If she went against the young master's dignity now, wouldn't she be asking for trouble? Only after the two figures had walked far away did Ling Xiao, Yao Guang, Xianyuan Weiyang, and Jin Han walk out of the Merchant Union's main hall. They looked up at the divine mountain in the distance. At this moment, countless figures soared into the sky and landed in front of the golden mountain path. However, no one dared to step on it. This is the first trial opened by the Daotian Academy. Young master, don't underestimate this stone path. Every time the Daotian Academy opens, most of the clan's disciples will be blocked before the first trial. Jin Han smiled, and her eyes were filled with battle intent. From the beginning to the end, she had been hiding a trace of resentment in her heart. With her status and talent, she was on par with Gu Chaoci. Why was the great Empress Immortal Phoenix able to receive the young master's favor, while she, the eldest princess of the Golden Crow clan, could only be a servant? This time, the Daotian Academy opened, and she desperately wanted to prove that she, Jin Han, was not inferior to anyone. Oh! Ling Xiao raised his eyebrows, his expression indifferent. Of course, with the number of prodigies in Daotian City, even 10 academies might not be able to accommodate them. Therefore, this divine path gate was the first step in selecting disciples. As for the second and third trial, they were the key to determining the seat. Distinctionless education? In this immortal path, one's strength determined one's status. Let's go. We can see which other human prodigies have come to the Daotian Academy this time. In the end, Ling Xiao did not hesitate anymore. He stepped out and flew toward the Golden Mountain. Yao Guang and Xianyuan Weiyang followed closely behind him. Only Jin Han turned to look at the main hall behind her, her eyes filled with regret. Originally, she had planned to push Hua Mingxi to the young master's side so that they could become her ally. She did not expect that so many major events had happened in Daotian City in the past few days, causing the young master to be busy slaying demons and not have time to interact with Hua Mingxi. It seemed that she could only rely on herself if she wanted to receive the young master's favor. Buzz. Spiritual light filled the sky above. Countless figures with powerful auras rose from all over the city and landed in front of Daotian Mountain. At that moment, there were already tens of thousands of disciples at the foot of the mountain. They were eager to give it a try. These people were prodigies from all over the Azure continent. They had come here to listen to the Tao, hoping that they could find opportunities here and become famous. Of course, many of them had already shown their faces at the Million Prodigies banquet. However, there were also some top prodigies who only wanted to cultivate. They would not waste time participating in such an obvious show-off. Look, what is that? Suddenly, a cry of surprise came from the crowd. Then, everyone turned their heads to look at the distant sky with puzzled eyes. At that moment, a figure bathed in divine light stepped down from the sky. With just one step, he was above everyone. Chapter 1201. It was a tall figure clad in battle armor. He had a square face and thick eyebrows. As he looked around, he was filled with killing intent. In his hand, he held a black halberd with dragon scales carved on it. From afar, it looked like he was holding a black demonic dragon, shining with a chilling light. He was at most 300 years old. However, the moment he appeared, the heavens and earth went silent. Everyone was shocked. "It's the successor of the Palace of Gods of War, Yuan Tianji. I didn't expect the God of War to come too." A shocking uproar instantly erupted from the crowd. Especially those monstrous geniuses who originally had hopes of seizing a spot in the top 10. At this moment, a wisp of shock and seriousness appeared on their faces. The Palace of Gods of War was rumored to have been founded by a great emperor. This person's combat strength was terrifying. He had once suppressed an era and was known as the War Emperor. Unfortunately, the War Emperor had swept across the 8 barren lands and had no opponent. He felt bored and used his cultivation to shatter the void and soar into the sky. No one in the azure sky knew whether the War Emperor was dead or alive. However, this force was still one of the top forces in the azure sky continent. However, ever since the War Emperor disappeared, the Palace of Gods of War had kept a low profile. Now they were in a semi-secluded state and would not step into the azure sky continent easily. Even so, 200 years ago, a successor of this force suddenly appeared. He traveled all over the azure sky continent and challenged the geniuses of thousands of sections. He had never lost. His name was Yuan Tianji. He was also known as the current god of war. Among the azure sky 100 geniuses, this person was enough to enter the top half. Some people even suspected that he had the potential to be in the quasi-sequence. Who would have thought that the opening of the Daotian Academy would attract such a peerless genius? Buzz! Just as everyone was exclaiming in their hearts, another loud boom came from the void in the distance. A ray of light fell from the sky like a meteor and landed on the ground. Then, a handsome young man in a white robe with thin eyebrows and thin lips appeared in everyone's sight. He held a paper fan in his hand. He had an ethereal temperament and a gentle smile, giving people a warm and friendly feeling. Young Master Wu. It's young Master Wu. Xiao Wu's husband, whose real name was Wu Lei, had long been forgotten. This person's background was mysterious. He was not from any sect or clan, but he was very talented. He had awakened his divine body and was good at using other people's Tao to return the favor. Because of his handsome appearance and elegant temperament, he was admired by many young ladies from famous clans. People gave him the nickname of Little Husband Wu. When they saw the two people that had suddenly arrived, the expressions of Shen Jingan, Wu Hongxi, Zhao Badu and the others who had already arrived immediately changed. Compared to these two, both the Grand Princess of the Divine Martial Academy and the descendant of the literary Saint Immortal Palace were not as famous. Although the few of them were ranked in the Green Azure 100, Yuan Tianji and Little Wu were the true pinnacle of the current generation. Originally, everyone had thought that the top 10 would be decided between Shen Jingan, Li Ju, Wang Yan, Xiang Kuan and the others. When the Lord Ling Xiao arrived, given his status, he would definitely be able to take one of the seats without having to do anything. What's more, there were two Azure contemporary echelon cultivators by his side. Looking at it this way, it seemed that the 10 spots had already been decided? Oh? You must be the Heaven's Peak Martial Immortal from the Palace of Gods of War. It's really better to meet you in person than to hear about you. I am Wu Lei, nicknamed Little Husband Wu. I wonder if I would be fortunate enough to exchange pointers with the Heaven's Peak Martial Immortal later? Wu Lei's smile was magnanimous, but there was a hint of craftiness in his eyes. To be honest, his divine body was a little useless. It did not have any power to speak of, and could only imitate other people's cultivation techniques and move. To put it simply, he could only cultivate if he was beaten up. The higher the cultivation of the person who beat him and the more terrifying the technique used, the more his strength would improve. Of course, the prerequisite was that he was not beaten to death. A few years ago, Wu Lei had also traveled all over the Azure continent and challenged the monstrous geniuses of various sections. However, he had never won. Until one day, when his divine body reached the phenomenal success stage and he comprehended other people's cultivation techniques and moves in one breath. It was then that he became famous and became a famous genius in the Azure world. In that battle, his opponent was also an expert of the 100 talent. However, Wu Lei executed a total of 137 types of divine abilities and forcefully exhausted that monstrous genius of the 100 talents to death. For a time, Wu Lei's name resounded throughout the Azure continent. However, all the sects avoided him and did not dare to use any of their techniques in front of him. Scram! Yuan Tianji shouted coldly. Suddenly, he seemed to have sensed something and raised his head to look at the sky. He saw a black-clothed figure slowly walking over. He was as handsome as jade and was incomparably handsome. Under his feet, there seemed to be a boundless sea of stars and clusters of Tao lotuses. There was an extremely gentle smile on that flawless face. It was as graceful as a painting, and it entered one's eyes. Heaven and earth were silent. Everything was silent. Only the sound of people swallowing their saliva could be heard from the foot of the mountain. Unknowingly, many geniuses trembled slightly and were close to bliss. It's Master Ling Xiao. In just 2 days, Ling Xiao's name was like the sun in the sky in Dao Heaven City. He killed Lord Xiaoyang forcefully, crushed Wang Yan with one punch, shattered the Dao heart of the literary sage's successor with 2 words, and killed the evil demon without caring about his own life. All of these were unforgettable. His domineering strength was as brilliant as the loyalty in his heart. It made people feel as if they saw everything that a human genius of the righteous Tao should be like. Ling Xiao. Yuan Tianji frowned slightly. His hand unconsciously tightened around the dragon halberd. With his status, he naturally did not dare to be disrespectful to the young master of the Ling people. However, as the successor of the Palace of Gods of War, he urgently wanted to compete with the top genius of this world. This was a kind of battle intent that came from his bones. Yuan Tianji's Tao was based on the word battle. Moreover, Ling Xiao was one of the few geniuses of this generation who had fought with the Sky Demon several times. As long as he defeated him, would it mean that he had the strength to compete with the Sky Demon? Ling Xiao seemed to have felt Yuan Tianji's eagerness. Above the blue sky, the corners of his mouth curled up slightly, but there was a cold glint in his eyes. The heavenly combat body was a 7th-grade Venerable Realm cultivator with 2 Tao laws, slaughter and strength. However, this person had no providence and was destined to be a background of an era. On the other hand, the young man in white standing next to him was surrounded by flowing Taoist rhymes and covered by auspicious clouds. He actually had 9,000 providence points. The divine phaseless body was a 7th-grade Venerable Realm cultivator. Interesting. When Ling Xiao killed Qin Chu previously, he had robbed him of his golden finger, the sacred body of all things. However, the mystery of the sacred body of all things was that it could fuse with cultivation technique. Obviously, the divine phaseless body was deducing cultivation techniques and using them for its own use. Cough, cough. Ling Xiao landed on the ground. As if it affected his old injuries, he immediately covered his mouth and coughed softly. His face was a little pale. Seeing this scene, many geniuses of the various clans immediately showed a look of worry and heartache. They did not hide the respect they had for Ling Xiao at all. The path to immortality is dangerous. Young master, you are the beauty of the world. Chapter 1202. Sir, how are you feeling? Xianyuan Weiyang and the other 2 girls followed closely behind Ling Xiao, looking worried. I'm fine. Ling Xiao shook his head and smiled bitterly. His gaze gently swept across everyone. It seemed that the only person who could benefit from this was the person with the divine body, shapeless body. It seemed that it was just as Ling Xiao had expected. The true monsters in the Azure Sky world would not waste time studying other people's paths. At the very least, apart from Yao Guang and Gu Chaoxiai, none of the 10 taboos of the Azure Sky world had descended. As for the divine body, shapeless body, he would naturally go wherever it was lively. Only then would he have the opportunity to master more martial arts technique. Fellow Taoist Tianji, since the immortal path has appeared, why don't we walk together? Wu Lei bowed slightly to Ling Xiao, then turned to Yuan Tianji and smiled. Get lost. Yuan Tianji furrowed his brows and ignored Wu Lei. However, the fighting spirit in his eyes was surging at this moment. Then, he turned and looked at Ling Xiao deeply. Then, he took a step and strode towards the end of the God's Path. Master, the God's Path not only tests one's physical strength, but it also tests one's temperament and determination. There are 999 steps, and the higher you go, the more terrifying your divine power and the greater the pressure on your physical body. Although you will pass the test if you can climb 500 steps, but, even so, most people here will not be able to enter the academy. Jin Han stood beside Ling Xiao and explained the rules of the God's Path to him. Hearing this, Ling Xiao raised his eyebrows and nodded. At this moment, spiritual light suddenly surged from Yuan Tianji's body. His aura was vast and mighty. His figure turned into an afterimage and flashed towards the end of the immortal path. Instantly, the foot of the mountain was filled with a hubbub of voices and noise. Everyone's eyes were filled with shock as they looked at the figure running on the mountain path. As everyone knew, the God's Path, Sword's Path, and Heaven's Path were all set. The higher the level, the greater the pressure on the physical body. Moreover, in order to show off the strength of the person with the destiny, there would usually be a few walk-on characters who would show off and then, Could it be that the God's Path had an empty reputation? From what I see, Yuan Tianji doesn't seem to be under any pressure. Brothers, what are you waiting for? Seize first place and become famous in the azure firmament. Charge! 4 figures instantly flashed out from within the crowd, and their auras were at the exalt realm as they flashed furiously towards the peak of the divine Tao. Only the one who had been making a ruckus just now didn't move. He stood quietly in the crowd, looking expectantly at the figures that were rushing out. PFFF. PFFF. Very quickly. When the 4 venerable realm prodigies followed Yuan Huaji's footsteps and walked up the mountain, strange noises suddenly came from the void. When the 4 people who were still in midair stepped into the 100th level of the divine Tao realm, they strangely shattered into blood mist. This, at the foot of the mountain, everyone's eyes were filled with shock. When they looked at the figure clad in heavy armor and a black halberd, their faces were already filled with solemnity. In the end, Yuan Tianji's figure stopped at the 899th level. His head was dripping with cold sweat. The black halberd in his hand was forcefully inserted into the mountain path so that it wouldn't be crushed by the terrifying divine power. Then, he slowly turned around and looked at the crowd at the foot of the mountain. His eyes were surging with battle intent as he stared at Ling Xiao. The heaven and earth were silent. The eyes of many prodigies trembled slightly. Yuan Tianji was originally a martial arts fanatic. In his eyes, there was no fear or apprehension at all. The Tao he walked was the Tao of battle. Only by challenging the high mountain could he get closer to the sky. Ling Xiao's great reputation had long been known to the whole world. Yuan Tianji didn't have a trace of hatred towards such a righteous hero. He was just curious. His reverence was something that had to be shown through actual strength and not word. Now that the Azure Sky prodigies were gathered at the Daotian Academy, it gave Yuan Tianji a chance to train his Tao heart. Reaching the 899th level was a miracle for everyone present. In fact, Even when the academy opened over the years, there were only a few people who could truly reach the 900th level. Legend had it that the pressure of each of the last 99 ancient steps was the sum of all the previous steps. In other words, the 900th level was just the beginning of the terrifying divine path. Throughout history, anyone who could reach the 900th level would eventually become a famous emperor in the history of the human race. In the past 10,000 years, only 3 people had reached the 900th level, and these 3 people were now the people who truly stood at the peak of the azure sky world. The divine martial emperor, the heavenly imperial prefecture lord, and a barbarian in the extreme north. In other words, Yuan Tianji was already the top of the current generation. The successor of the war emperor lived up to his name. Could it be that another war emperor would appear in the azure sky world in this generation? The corners of Ling Zhao's lips curled up into a gentle smile as she coughed lightly. Especially when he felt the anticipation in everyone's eyes, he immediately shook his head and sighed. The meaning in his eyes was self-evident. Why do I have to bear the pressure of this great reputation at such a young age? Oh right, young master was seriously injured a few days ago when he was slaying the demons. It's obviously unfair to climb the mountain now. That's right. I suggest that young master directly ascend the academy from the back mountain and not take any more risk. Yes, young master, for the sake of the world, please go to the back mountain. Seeing Ling Zhao's pale face, many female geniuses immediately shouted softly with angry expressions. However, Ling Zhao shook his head, his eyes calm and indifferent. Since it's a trial, there's naturally no shortcut to speak of. This trial is all about fairness and justice. Although I, Ling Zhao, have mediocre talent, I don't want to be a coward who is afraid of running away. What? Young master, you're upright. Hearing this, there was a shocking uproar at the foot of the mountain again. Even Shen Jingan, Wu Lei, and the others looked at Ling Zhao with eyes full of respect. Let's go. Ling Zhao raised his head and looked at the tall figure standing on the mountain path. A sinister look flashed across his eyes. Then, under the respectful and expectant gazes of the crowd, he slowly walked towards the peak of the mountain. Everyone present had a good understanding of the strength of the Ling clan's young master. However, no one knew whether he could break the shackles today and be comparable to the 3 leaders of the human race. After all, young master was still injured. Even if he was suppressed by Yuan Tianji, it was pardonable. However, just as everyone was excitedly watching Ling Zhao walk up the divine path, the imagined 100 steps in one step did not appear. They saw Ling Zhao walking slowly with an indifferent expression. He actually walked towards the peak of the mountain at an extremely steady speed. He looked very much like an old man who woke up early in the morning for a walk. It seems that young master's injuries are more serious than we thought. Sigh, young master, you're just unwilling to bend your spine. Fine, I'll respect any decision you make. Let's climb the mountain too. Sighs sounded one after another. Compared to Yuan Tianji's performance just now, Ling Zhao's performance was indeed a little disappointing. Although his speed was not considered slow, it was somewhat less shocking. It was completely different from what everyone had expected. Let's start too. Jean Han turned her head, her golden eyes filled with battle intent. Gu Chao Si had not appeared yet. However, this time, she must prove to young master that she was also worthy of standing side by side with him. Chapter 1203. Ba. At the foot of the mountain, Jean Han-er's feather robe fluttered as she dashed out. Yao Guang and Xianyuan Weiyang followed closely behind, chasing after Ling Zhao. When they saw this scene, the geniuses from the various sects who were eager to give it a try finally stopped hesitating. They strode forward and competed to flash towards the peak of the mountain. After the experience of the 4 idiots, no one dared to take 10 steps in one step like Yuan Tianji. The crowd surged forward like a tidal wave. At the foot of the mountain, Yang Yuan stood with his hands clasped behind his back. After 2 days of not seeing each other, the chosen one looked inexplicably tired. Ever since Zhang Juji turned into a demon and fled, he had been secretly looking for news about him. However, before Yang Yuan could find this little brother of his, the news of what had happened in the Spirit Creek Valley spread throughout the Azure Heaven continent. Yang Yuan couldn't accept it. How could such a straightforward and gentle-looking young man be a devil? Even if he didn't know Zhang Juji's true identity, he had a strange feeling that he wasn't a demon. There must be some misunderstanding. However, after all, Yang Yuan was only a disciple of a small sect. He didn't even have the right to enter the 10,000 talents banquet. How could he change people's opinions? Therefore, in the past 2 days, he often sighed in sorrow and became more worried about what people said. Until he looked at the straight heavenly path in front of him and saw Yuan Tianji standing at the peak of the mountain, overlooking all living beings. The gloom in Yang Yuan's heart was instantly swept away. If there was anything in this world that could cure unhappiness, then to the chosen one, it must be bragging. Especially in the past few days, Yang Yuan's bragging wasn't going well. He was often slapped in the face. However, this divine path was an inanimate object. It wouldn't change because of one's background. Physical strength? Mental strength? I, Yang Yuan, cultivate the jade golden body. How could a mere mountain path stop me from ascending to the heavens? This time, I will let the entire Azure continent know my name, Yang Yuan. Brother Jijio, I believe that we will meet again. When the time comes, I will announce your difficulties to the world. Junior sister, let's go. Yang Yuan took a deep breath. His expression was gentle, and his eyes were filled with an urgent desire to show off. Yes. Xia Jiming nodded indifferently and looked up at the black-clothed figure that had already reached the halfway point of the mountain. Finally, everything was coming to an end. Xia Jiming did not know why Ling Xiao had lured Yang Yuan here. However, now that her mission had been accomplished, she was already extremely disgusted with Yang Yuan. She didn't ask for young master's love. As long as she could stay away from this flag dog, she would be satisfied. However, just as the two of them lifted their feet and were about to walk forward, a cheerful laughter suddenly came from behind them. "Ha, senior brother, please wait." Yang Yuan frowned slightly. When he turned around, he saw an ordinary-looking young man in a green robe striding over and bowing to him. "Senior brother, you look familiar. Have we met before?" The young man in the green robe looked at Yang Yuan with a puzzled expression. Familiar? Hearing that, Yang Yuan's eyes did not waver. No, at least. I don't remember seeing you before. Although he had experienced many twists and turns during the 10,000 talents banquet, he had still managed to put on a good show in a few of the minor competitions. For example, he had the spiritual crystal and he had crippled Xiang Kuan. Although he did not get what he wanted in the end, compared to the ordinary sex geniuses, the fact that he had defeated Xiang Kuan was enough to make him popular. Haha, familiar? Soon, I will let all of you know that I, Yang Yuan, am an existence that none of you can match up to. With that thought, Yang Yuan's eyes turned cold and he turned around to leave. However, at that moment, the young man in the green robe in front of him suddenly stretched out a hand and pressed it on his shoulder. "Senior brother, take a good look." Yang Yuan frowned. The golden light around his body shone brightly and forced the young man to take a few steps back. Then, he said coldly, "If you continue to pester me, don't blame me for being rude." Okay. The young man in the green robe smiled brightly. He was not angry. When he saw Yang Yuan's figure disappear, his face turned serious. "It is indeed useful. Even those who have fought with me before cannot detect the aura of my divine body." That's right. That person was Zhang Juji. Yesterday, he had followed Yin Yu's guidance and found an ancient site near Dao Tian City. However, there was no spiritual treasure in it. There was only a golden talisman. According to Inu, the talisman could conceal one's aura. Even a supreme being would not be able to detect it. Although Yang Yuan's cultivation level was not high, they had fought before and were very familiar with each other's aura. If even he could not detect it, then he could go to the Daotian Academy. Of course, to Zhang Jiuji, as long as Ling Xiao and Hua Mingxi could not recognize him, then the supreme beings in the academy would not know who he was. Therefore, he had already succeeded in half of his trip. A treasure that Inu saw as the best in the world. Just thinking about it made Xiao Jiuji excited. The road of Dao Mountain was in an uproar. Silhouettes after silhouettes walked along the mountain. Their expressions gradually turned serious, bitter, and then sad. Only those monstrous geniuses who were already famous and had great talent still wanted to prove their strength and work hard to move forward after passing the 500th step. In the end, even someone as strong as Shin Jingan could only reach the 693rd step and could not go any further. Zhao Bado, who had always been weak, went against the flow and finally stopped at the 707th step. However, compared to before, this descendant of the sage of literature's face was no longer cold and aloof. Instead, he looked tired. Gradually, the noise on the mountain path became so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Apart from Xiao Wu and the Grand Princess of the Divine Martial Academy, Wu Hongqiu, who was dressed in an imperial robe, only Lord Ling Xiao and the three women behind him were still moving forward. However, the four of them were not in a hurry and had only reached the 700th step. However, it seemed that from the beginning to the end, their expressions did not change at all. Even their speed was not affected at all. Look, who is that? At this time, most of the geniuses from the various sects had stopped climbing. They stood on the mountain path and looked up at the few silhouettes above. At this moment, a cry of surprise suddenly came from the crowd. A young man in a white robe passed by the crowd and headed toward the peak of the mountain at a shocking speed. 500, 600, 700, who is that young man? How can he be so talented? I recognize him. I think his name is Yang Bian or Yang Qiu. Previously, at the 10,000 Talents banquet, he defeated Xiang Kuan and crippled that genius from the Divine Palace. So it's him. The crowd exclaimed, and their expressions were somewhat complicated. When the white-robed figure left Zhao Bado and Wu Hongqiu behind him, there was a burst of noise on the mountain path. It seems that Yang Bian is going to become famous this time. He defeated so many geniuses. Who is this young man? His name is Yang Yuan, not Yang Bian. Just as everyone was discussing in low voices, they saw a figure in a green robe slowly walking over on the mountain path. In the end, he stopped on the 500th stone step. He looked up at the white-robed figure and watched as he walked step by step to the top of the mountain. A heartfelt smile suddenly bloomed on his face. Chapter 1204. Brother Yang, you really didn't disappoint me. Zhang Jiuji clenched his fists and smiled happily. He still had some respect for this senior brother with a terrifying physical body. He dared to love and hate, and he was not afraid of the rich and powerful. However, he was able to let go. When the two of them were fighting for the 3,000 moments of time, it was Yang Yuan who gave up at the critical moment, giving Zhang Jiuji more chances to get the treasure. Such a person was worthy of his heart. But fate made fools of people. Before Zhang Jiuji could develop a touching brotherhood with him, he was killed by a scoundrel and bore the name of a devil. Now, he wanted to go to the Daotian Academy to find the good fortune that Inu spoke of. Naturally, he didn't dare to expose his identity. To become famous in the azure sky. Once upon a time, this was his dream. If it weren't for this series of accidents, he would be standing at the highest point, overlooking the common people and dominating the world. No one knew of his 100 years of cultivation, but he reached the top in a single day. With Zhang Juji's good fortune saint body and his body tempered by divine thunder, the Palace of War's successor was just a slightly bigger stepping stone. Fate made fools of people, fate made fools of people. Today, he concealed his aura and changed his appearance. He didn't dare to be too ostentatious for fear of attracting unnecessary trouble. The 500th step was enough to enter the Dao Tian Academy. He could only watch as Yang Yuan climbed to the top step by step and left his name in history. Brother Yang, go, bring my glory and let all the geniuses of the azure sky know that even without a background, you can still become the only one in the world. I'm sorry, Master, Father, I'm sorry, fifth senior sister. I failed to live up to your expectations. Zhang Juji slowly closed his eyes. Sorrow flowed around his body, faintly resonating with the heavens and earth. It turned into a breeze and the sky trembled. At this time, there was a slight fluctuation in his realm. The ancients, they didn't deceive me. Sorrow is power. Finally, when Yang Yuan's figure reached the 799th step, Yuan Tianji's eyes were filled with fighting spirit. He turned his head and looked at the youth beside him. His face was calm, but there was a great momentum around him. What's your name? This was an opponent worth taking seriously. Who would have thought that instead of the young master of the Ling people, such an ordinary-looking young man with no reputation would appear? But this divine Tao simply could not be faked in the slightest. Each step represented a different strength. Since this person was able to make it this far, it proved that his talent was definitely not below his own. Furthermore, even Wu Hongfu, Wu Lei, and the others had stopped at the 730th level and were unable to take another step forward. It seemed that his biggest opponent in this competition was this ordinary-looking young man in white. Ling people's young master? Hee, I gave you time to catch up, but I didn't expect you to be so weak. It was hard to live up to his reputation. My name is… Yang Yuan took a deep breath and his face suddenly lit up. Yang Yuan. Boom. The entire Dao mountain trembled for a moment. Behind the celestial gate at the peak of the mountain, there were already countless figures standing there. Among them, the 4 hall masters and the geniuses of the 4 halls all looked at the scene at the foot of the mountain in shock. That's right. This young man's talent and temperament are not bad, and he doesn't seem to be from a prestigious family. When he comes up the mountain, the Dao Academy will invite him to cultivate in the academy. A black-haired, white-robed middle-aged man with a cold expression nodded indifferently and said in a low voice. The Academy Master's lecture was also an opportunity to recruit a disciple. The Daotian Academy taught everyone regardless of their background. As long as one had talent, one could be chosen by the 4 hall masters and become a disciple of the Academy. And this was the terrifying part of the Daotian Academy. There were students everywhere, and all of them were disciples. Come on, why is it that every time a genius appears, your Dao Academy has something to do with it? Dao Shenji, why are you so shameless? Beside him, a plainly dressed old man who did not care about his appearance sneered. Without caring about his reputation, he reached out to pick his nose and then flicked it lightly. Zhong Tu, you are a hall master after all. When will you be able to maintain some dignity in front of your disciples? Dao Shenji frowned slightly. His eyes were cold, and there seemed to be Dao patterns in them. What's the use of dignity? My Array Academy is about to lose all its disciples. Who do you want me to maintain my dignity for? It was hard to imagine that such a vulgar and eccentric old man was one of the famous Academy Masters of the Daotian Academy. The Array Academy Master, Zhong Tuesday rumor had it that this person was extremely domineering when he was young, and he advocated killing. He had once slaughtered the living beings of an entire world by himself because the master of that world said that the Tao of Arrays was a heretical path and was not to be feared. In fact, even Dao Shenji, the head of the Dao Academy and the one with the highest cultivation among the 4 Academy Masters, was very wary of him. The Tao of arrays was unpredictable. There were often unexpected surprises when fighting with others. Zhong Tu was not only proficient in arrays, but his cultivation was also terrifying. Therefore, even Dao Shenji might not be able to win against him. Moreover, this person had a strange temperament and did not play by the rules. The disciples he taught were all strange and unpredictable. In his words, this was how the Tao of arrays should be. Peerless geniuses were often lunatics. All right, can't the two of you talk less in front of all the disciples? Dao Shenji's Tao will was circulating around him, and there was a clear glow above his head. Beside them, another old man in a black robe suddenly sighed softly and shook his head with a bitter smile. His name was Li Rulin. He was the master of the Confucian Academy. He was gentle and did not like to fight. Among the 4 academy masters, except for Dao Shenji, who had broken through to become a venerable and was at the Earth Supreme level, the remaining 3 academy masters were all at the 9th grade saint level. However, the 4 of them were all extremely talented in the 4 paths of Tao, formation, Tao, and Confucianism. Therefore, even utmost exalted level experts did not dare to underestimate the 4 hall masters. Moreover, the 4 of them had many disciples. Offending them was equivalent to offending the Tao faction of Azure. No one dared to try it. Humph, old Manly, it's easy for you to say that. Why don't you give that little disciple called Lu Ming to me? I promise that I'll listen to you in the future. Zhong Tu snorted coldly with a gloomy expression. Compared to Tao, Confucianism, and Buddhism, the Tao of arrays was a small Tao after all. There were very few talented people. Zhong Tu took in disciples very seriously. He did not want those he did not like, no matter how talented they were. As a result, there were fewer and fewer disciples in the Array Academy in the past 1,000 years. They were at the bottom of the 4 academies. This little disciple of the Confucian Academy, named Lu Ming, had been in the limelight in the academy recently. Not only did he defeat a group of senior brothers and senior sisters at the venerable 5th realm, but he also displayed an extremely terrifying temperament. Such a young man would definitely become the top of the generation in less than 100 years. Moreover, the Confucian Academy had Li Zhichu, who was also benevolent and righteous at a young age. Both of them had the potential to be in the ascendant sequence. It was really enviable. Ha ha! Hearing that, Li Rulin only shook his head and smiled. He did not say anything else and turned to look at the 2 figures standing side by side in the distance. His eyes were filled with relief. Chapter 1205. Senior Sister, is that young man in white the young master you mentioned? Behind the immortal gate, Lu Ming and Li Zhichu stood side by side, looking at the immortal Tao. At this moment, he thought that the young master that Li Zhichu fancied must be extremely talented, righteous, and gentle. Although Yuan Tianji was terrifyingly talented and had the aura of a combat emperor, he was not gentle at all. On the other hand, the young man in white was neither arrogant nor rash. He pushed his way to the peak of the immortal Tao. Apart from him, Lu Ming could not see anyone else who had the ability to attract Senior Sister. There was a divine armament on the immortal gate. Only those who had reached the 500th step could be seen. Now there was a sea of people on the mountain path. Even Li Zhichu could not see the end of it. Only those who were truly outstanding would be able to attract attention. No. Li Zhichu looked lonely. She shook her head slightly and tiptoed, trying to take a closer look. Today, her eyes were bright and she had put on some makeup. Her white clothes were fluttering in the wind, spotless. It was obvious that she had dolled herself up. Her young master had said that he would come to the Daotian Academy. For today, she had specially waited here early in the morning, afraid that she would miss the opportunity to meet him. However, to Li Zhichu's disappointment, her young master did not appear at all. In the vast sea of people, the mountain wind was lonely. Even though there were mountains and forests as companions, it still felt bleak. No? Lu Ming's expression turned cold. He turned to look at Li Jichu. However, at this moment, he saw a rare trace of melancholy on her beautiful face. For some reason, Lu Ming felt a little depressed at this moment. It was only when Li Jichu expressed her longing for that young master that Lu Ming realized that senior sister's shadow had already been buried in his heart. For the past few days, he had defeated all the talents in the academy, more or less proving himself. Although Lu Ming did not want to admit that he was trapped by worldly feelings, this was an obsession. However, this kind of suppression was like a kind of obsession. The more he wanted to suppress it, the more it surged. It was impossible to suppress it. Therefore, there was nothing that could not change in the feelings in this world. If one was moved, one should not hesitate. Yes, perhaps his injuries were too severe. Li Jichu said inexplicably, her eyes filled with worry. During this period of time, the 4 courtyards strictly ordered their disciples to leave the mountain privately during the academy competition. However, what happened in Dao Heaven City still reached the ears of this first disciple of the Confucian institution. In order to help Gu Chaoxiai kill Lord Xiaoyang, he destroyed Wang Yan of the 12 absolutes of the Heavenly Imperial Palace with a single punch during the Wan Jiao banquet. This kind of domineering behavior not only did not make Li Jichu feel annoyed, but when she thought of that flawless immortal face and the gentle smile that often hung at the corner of his mouth, Li Jichu felt her heart tremble, unable to extricate herself. Originally, Li Jichu thought that the young master would be able to suppress all the other geniuses and obtain the supreme honor. However, there were traces of demons in Dao Heaven City, and it was the young master. He fought against the demons alone without fear of death, and in the end, he was almost killed. Young master, you are just like that. Never for oneself, but for the common people. When will you learn how to take care of yourself? Or should I take care of you? Sigh. All of a sudden, Li Jichu felt a sense of desolation in her heart. Looking at the crowd on the mountain path, she felt extremely annoyed. Senior sister? What's wrong? Nothing. Li Jichu shook her head gently and turned to leave. However, at this moment, she heard a series of exclamations from the crowd. Look! It's Master Ling Xiao. It's actually Master Ling Xiao. I heard that the young master is injured. Why is he still so arrogant to step on the divine path? Damn it! Isn't this showing that our Daotian Academy is too unreasonable? The young master was injured to kill the demons, but he still wants to participate in the trial personally. I suggest that we quickly send the elders to welcome the young master up the mountain. What? I suspect that you are looking down on the young master. Even if we want to welcome him, it should be the heads of the 4 courtyards coming personally. Only then can it show that our academy values him. The disciples of the 4 courtyards exclaimed and looked furious. However, Li Jichu's face suddenly showed a trace of expectation. She slowly turned around and looked at the mountain path. As expected, she saw a peerless figure in black standing out from the crowd calmly and walking towards the mountain peak. His footsteps were not fast, but he was unusually calm and relaxed. Behind him, 3 celestial figures followed closely. They were half a step behind him like servant girls. Suddenly, Li Jichu's eyes flashed with a trace of disappointment. However, it disappeared in an instant. Li Jichu recognized those 3 people. The Bodhisattva of the extreme west, the princess of Xianyuan, the lord of the human race, the princess of the golden crow, born with divine meridians. It could be said that any one of these 3 women was enough to shake the entire Azure continent and be sought after by tens of thousands of people. However, at this moment they were like servant girls, following the footsteps of that young man. They did not dare to take a step forward. Inexplicably, Li Jichu's red lips trembled slightly. Her eyes were filled with vicissitudes. At this moment, she really wanted to be like them and stand behind the young master. Just like this, she wanted to accompany him step by step to the top of the world. Senior sister? What's wrong? Why did her cheeks suddenly become wet? Lu Ming's eyes narrowed slightly. He followed Li Jichu's gaze and looked at the figure on the mountain path. In the next moment, the corner of his eyes suddenly trembled. Right from the beginning, Lu Ming believed that the path of Tao was to walk alone and not have any distractions. Status, appearance, and background could all be said to be fabricated. However, for the first time as a man, he was shocked by another man's appearance. His celestial appearance was unparalleled and flawless. It was as if he was carved out of the best mutton-fat jade. He was unique. Every move and even a look could cause ripples in one's heart. It was not an exaggeration to use any beautiful words to describe this young man. No wonder. Senior sister's Tao heart was strong, but she was obsessed with a young man. Compared to him, Lu Ming only felt inferior and insignificant. He was not worth mentioning. The young master of the Ling people. He did not expect that the gentle young master that senior sister mentioned was actually the famous young master of the Ling people in Qingtsang. It was just that. Although this person was righteous, he was already engaged. Now that he had three beauties by his side, what status would senior sister have if she were to follow him? Senior sister, I'm not narrow-minded. As long as you yearn for something, I will give you my blessings. However, you won't be able to get the young master of the Ling people. It's all right. The wind blinded my eyes. Li Jichu smiled sweetly. Her beauty was unparalleled. However, the sorrowful frown between her brows made one feel pity for her for no reason. Young master, you're finally here. Oh? That young man in black is the young master of the Ling people? In front of the immortal gate, the four courtyard masters looked surprised. Obviously, they did not expect this young master of the ancient clan to be so popular. It's said that a few days ago, it was this young man who fought the demons and saved countless disciples of the clan. However, he was seriously injured and almost died. Dao Shenji nodded indifferently. He has a good temperament. Although the Ling people have a strong foundation, in terms of teaching disciples, our academy is the best. When he comes up the mountain, I plan to— Nonsense. Is this young master of the Ling people someone you can teach? Today Zhongtu will say this. When the young master of the Ling people comes up the mountain, I plan to discuss Tao with him. Whoever dares to stop me, I will smash his head. Zhongtu snorted coldly and glared fiercely at Dao Shenji. His eyes shone brightly and dark lines appeared. Not bad. Not bad. He was neither arrogant nor rash. He had a righteous heart. This Ling Xiao was a clear stream among the young masters of the ancient clan. Chapter 1206. On the divine path, the voices of the people froze. At this moment, everyone was dumbfounded as they looked at the four peerless figures. They watched as they walked step by step toward the peak. Their carefree and unrestrained appearance did not attract much attention at first. However, when the four of them reached the 700th step and continued to walk forward at an unhurried pace, the foot of the mountain became absolutely silent. Especially the black-clothed figure at the front. The instant he took a step forward, the primordial Taoist rhymes seemed to appear beneath his feet. It was shockingly dazzling. A clear radiance spread 90,000 miles, giving rise to a myriad of phenomena. However, there was not the slightest trace of spiritual might rippling from his body. Even Yaoguang Bodhisattva and Xianyuan Princess had eyes as deep as an ancient well. There was no bitterness in their eyes. It was only when they occasionally looked at the young man in front of them that they seemed to be happy. Beside the three of them, Jean Han Er's forehead was gradually covered in sweat. However, she also did not use her spiritual power. Instead, she used her physical body and bloodline to resist the terrifying external power. This is too terrifying. Young Master and the others seemed to be resisting this divine might with their physical bodies. Even though young master is seriously injured, it seems that he is not someone ordinary people can compare to. Earlier, I was too narrow-minded. At this moment, on the 899th step, Yuan Huaji's expression gradually turned serious. However, there was no resentment or anger. The opponent he desired should be able to suppress the world and reign supreme. Only then would the path to immortality be dazzling. Those who could be defeated by him would never be his enemy. That was because they were simply unworthy. From the beginning to the end, what Yuan Tianji wanted was someone who could stand shoulder to shoulder with him. Even an opponent he needed to look up to. Only then would he be able to maintain his original heart and his fighting spirit would not decline. Ling Xiao, I will give you time to catch up. You better not disappoint me. Beside him, Yang Yuan turned his head and glanced at the foot of the mountain. When he saw Xia Zhimen climbing the 500th step with difficulty, a warm smile appeared on his face. In the end, Zhimeng, you are not far away from me. Just watch. Today, I will stand at the peak of the world and be filled with glory. Your name will be remembered by the world together with me. It will be immortal. Boom! Suddenly, a golden radiance bloomed around Yang Yuan's body. It was like a scorching sun that illuminated the sky. On the mountain path, there was an uproar. Everyone was dumbfounded as they stared at the young man who was walking towards the 900th step. Their eyes were filled with disbelief. How is this possible? That Yang Yuan actually wanted to challenge the Qing Tsang sage and enter the 900th divine stair? Inexplicably, a trace of mockery appeared in many people's eyes. In this day and age, anyone really dared to pretend to be impressive. Originally, the fact that a nameless youth could stand shoulder to shoulder with Yuan Tianji had already attracted the envy of countless people. Yet, he made such an arrogant move. Aren't you obviously looking for ridicule? At this moment, Yang Yuan took a step forward, but he didn't put his foot down. Visible spiritual energy ripples spread out from the 900th step. Strong winds howled as divine might fluctuated. Just a single strand of aura was enough to cause the expressions of countless monstrous geniuses to change. A solemn expression appeared on Yang Yuan's face. Sweat flowed down his face and dripped onto the ancient bluestone path. It was a ghastly sight. In the end, when Yang Yuan's foot landed, the golden radiance around him had already dimmed a little. But, before the crowd could be shocked, they saw the young man lift his foot again. This Yang Yuan, where did he come from? Isn't this too terrifying? He actually has the physical talent to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Qing Tsang sage. What's the use of having a strong physical body? Which sect still specializes in cultivating the physical body? I can kill a 6th-stage Venerable Realm expert with a wave of my hand. Discussions instantly rang out. Everyone looked at the young man who was struggling to move forward with a complicated expression and said sarcastically. In particular, Zhang Jiuji's eyes were filled with a complicated look of bitterness. This was the first time he had stepped into the Academy's divine path. However, he had already seen Yang Yuan's physical strength. That day at the 10,000 talents banquet, the two of them had fought. Although the young man's golden body was extremely powerful, the one who won in the end was him, Zhang Jiuji. In other words, since Yang Yuan could break through the shackles and become respected by tens of thousands of people, then he, Zhang Jiuji, could do the same. In fact, if he hadn't been framed and reduced to his current state, he would be the one standing at the peak of the mountain and being the focus of the thousands of sects in the Qing Tsang continent. Zhang Jiuji, sullen, resentful. Even though Zhang Jiuji's Tao heart was tenacious and his saint body was naturally formed, this feeling of only being able to watch others show off was truly unreconciled. Moreover, he was supposed to be the one pretending to be the idiot. As for the ridicule of the people at the foot of the mountain, only when one was outstanding enough would they attract controversy. Otherwise, how many people would pay attention to those trash kneeling at the foot of the mountain? A tall tree attracts the wind, and this immortal path should have been going against the flow, crushing all doubts and ridicule. You should ask your father to buy you a GTR. Why are you still at the foot of the mountain when I'm already at the top? Senior brother Yang Yuan. Right now, you carry my hopes and expectations. Oh! On the mountain path, Yuan Tianji frowned slightly as he coldly looked at the white-clothed figure in front of him. Holding the dragon halberd tightly in his hand, he suddenly grinned. Interesting, what an unexpected surprise. This immortal path was truly a magnificent one. Work hard to climb. Only when you are dazzling enough will I be able to obtain greater happiness when I trample you under my feet. Buzz! But, just as everyone was in shock, a buzzing sound suddenly came from the ancient path. Everyone was stunned. When they turned their heads to look, they saw that, unknowingly, the peerless figure in black was already standing beside Yuan Tianji. Even the three women behind him were standing side by side as they stepped onto the 899th ancient step. Lord Ling Xiao. It's the Lord Ling Xiao. Can young master break the shackles of the predecessors and become a new peerless divine being? I don't know. If young master wasn't injured, he should be able to. Unfortunately, now, Ling Xiao. Yuan Tianji's expression froze as he turned to look at the youth beside him. However, at this moment, his eyes were extremely calm. Even his body did not emit a trace of spiritual power, and he did not even look at him. Then, before everyone could react from their shock, they saw Ling Xiao's footsteps light as he stepped onto the 900th step with a steady pace. Yang Yuan, you can definitely do it. Right now, you are already the center of attention, the only one in this generation. However, you can't stop. You have to prove to everyone that you can go further. Zhi Meng. For Zhi Meng. On the 900th step, Yang Yuan's heart roared crazily. The golden radiance around his body suddenly brightened. Even his bones and blood organs showed a kind of lustrous jade color. At this moment, all of his attention was on the divine path. He did not pay attention to the black-clothed figure that suddenly walked over to him. Chapter 1207. Yang Yuan. You can do it. Once you step on it, you will be the only one in the world. Ah! Yang Yuan looked up to the sky and shouted. He suddenly clenched his fist. Around him, the aura of the great Tao was revived and golden light flowed. As the Tao pattern evolved, an immortal shadow seemed to appear from his bones and flesh, revealing endless wonders. But, just as he lifted his foot and tried his best to take a new step, he suddenly heard footsteps beside his ear. Yang Yuan turned his head in a daze until he saw a flawless immortal face pass by him. She calmly stepped on the stairs and walked towards the peak of the mountain with unhurried step. For a moment, he only felt that it was ridiculous. How could it be? His jade golden body was an ancient classic, and its power was overwhelming. But even so, it was still extremely difficult for him to walk on this ancient path. Every step was difficult. How could Ling Xiao maintain such calmness? Looking at him, this so-called trial was not even worth mentioning at all. Was it not worth mentioning at all? Pucci. Suddenly, a force even more terrifying than the one before came crashing down on his head. With Yang Yuan's strength, he was already under great pressure from the divine path. Being so distracted, his Tao heart was shaken, and he was crushed and fell directly down the mountain path. Beep, the son of destiny's mind is shaken. Congratulations to the host for plundering 2,000 luck points and 20,000 villain points. Hearing the notification from the system, Ling Xiao was not surprised at all. Just now, he deliberately gave Yang Yuan a chance to perform so that he could give him a simple blow when he was the center of attention. This mountain path contained extremely terrifying divine power, and Ling Xiao only slightly released his aura and mixed it with the divine power, and Yang Yuan was directly pushed down the mountain path. However, Zhang Juji actually took the initiative to give up the opportunity to show off at this time, which more or less surprised Ling Xiao. It seemed that after experiencing the previous ordeal, this little leak had learned to endure. Did you see that? I, Ling Xiao, love and care for the heavenly wills. I'm a professional in tempering their Tao hearts and helping them grow. Why aren't you shouting? Roll down. That Yang Yuan is coming down. On the mountain path, cries of surprise could be heard everywhere. However, at this moment, other than the respect they had for Ling Xiao, there was also a hint of mockery in their eyes. Yang Yuan? Pucci. Who asked you to be so pretentious? Now your head is almost gone. Are you satisfied now? Everyone looked coldly at the white-robed figure who was tumbling down. They watched as he struggled with all his might, but before he could get up, he was crushed by the enormous force of the ancient paths and fell down. Zhang Juji instantly sighed lightly when he saw this scene. He took a step forward, and his figure transformed into an afterimage as he raised his foot and stomped Yang Yuan onto the 600th step. Senior brother Yang Yuan, are you all right? With Zhang Juji's strength, he naturally could not see what Ling Xiao had done in secret. Even Yang Yuan only thought that it was because he was distracted, which caused his Tao heart to fluctuate, which led to his current situation. Yang Yuan was stunned when he felt the foot stepping on his head and the force from it. When he raised his head again, he saw the green-robed young man looking at him gently. Yang Yuan struggled fiercely and stood up from the ground. However, the trace of blood at the corner of his mouth and the tattered white robe on his body made him look somewhat miserable. He failed again. Why was it that every time he tried to show off, something unexpected would happen and he would embarrass himself? Sigh, senior brother, there's no need to be angry. You're already doing very well. Looking at the gloomy young man in front of him, Zhang Juji comforted him softly. However, at this moment, his eyes were also somewhat lonely. He raised his head and looked at the black-robed figure walking on the mountain peak. His heart trembled inexplicably. It seemed like, from the beginning to the end, the young master of the Ling people had been climbing the mountain at the same speed? Originally, he thought that Yin had attacked too heavily and injured Ling Zhao's foundation. However, from the looks of it, even if his injuries had not healed, his talent was also unique in the world. However, why was the word Ling not among the 13 taboos mentioned by Master? However, I wonder if the Western Buddha mentioned by Master has anything to do with this bodhisattva? Yang Yuan snorted coldly and glared at Zhang Juji fiercely. He raised his hand and wiped the footprint on his face. However, he did not continue climbing the mountain. Instead, he walked toward Xiaojimeng. Compared to the outstanding talents of the sects on the mountain path, in the entire Azure world, only the young master of the Ling people was better than him. As such, he did not need to prove anything. Inexplicably, a determined face suddenly appeared in Yang Yuan's mind. Brother Jijio, I wonder if you're qualified to stand shoulder to shoulder with Ling Xiao with your talent? At the same time, on the 900th step, Yao Guang's body quietly bloomed with Buddhist light. Then, she also stepped forward and walked forward. Although she had used her spiritual power, she still appeared to be rather calm and did not feel too much pressure. On the other hand, Xianyuan Weiyang's blood qi surged and turned into a sea of blood. Not only did it not have a trace of evil aura, but it also had a majestic and heavy holy aura. Then, she also stepped forward and chased after Ling Xiao. Only Jin Han Er's face was extremely pale. Even though her body was surrounded by flames, it was still extremely difficult for her to take this step. Time passed and finally everyone's figures stopped on the mountain path. Even with the strength of Wu Lei, Wu Hongxi, Shen Jing'an, and the others, they stopped at the 700th step and could not move forward. Of course, the divine Tao was a competition of physical strength. They were not good at this and could not be compared to Yuan Tianji. However, it did not mean that they would definitely lose in a fair fight. Everyone had their own strengths and specializations. On the other hand, the young master of the Ling people was rumored to be exceedingly skilled in the sword Dao. They did not expect his physical strength to be so terrifying. Even though Wu Hongxi and the others had already seen him destroy Wang Yan with a single punch, it seemed that they had still underestimated his strength. Lord Ling Xiao, as expected of you. In the entire Azure continent, other than this young master, only the young master of the Realm Lord Palace, Xuexian, could compete with the Sky Demon. No wonder he had the confidence to kill the demon for the sake of the common people. An invincible physical body and an invincible sword. Among those of the same generation, perhaps only the 10 great sequences could compete with him. Ba. On the mountain path in the distance, Yao Guang, dressed in a white robe, put his palms together. Behind him, the shadows of 10,000 Buddhas suddenly appeared. They either sat cross-legged and chanted sutras, or walked in the chaotic world, following Yao Guang's footstep. However, gradually, even with Yao Guang's azure-glazed body, she could no longer lift her feet. She could only watch as the black-clothed figure walked into the distance until he stood at the peak of the sky. The 940th step was her limit. Xianyuan Weiyang also stopped at the 910th step. Panting, he raised his head and looked forward. A trace of grievance appeared on his pretty face. "Young master, why didn't you wait for me?" The entire mountain path was silent. Jean Hon'er frowned slightly. She felt somewhat lonely in her heart. Now it seemed that her talent was still slightly lacking. Compared to Xianyuan Weiyang, she could not compare to the West Pole Bodhisattva, who had already ascended the sequence. Fortunately, her young master's talent was unique in the world. It was impossible for anyone to stand shoulder to shoulder with him. Thinking of this, the disappointment in Jean Hon'er's heart lessened a little. "If I can't do it, neither can you." Chapter 1208. Haha, chaotic times are indeed full of evildoers. In the academy, the 4 academy masters sighed deeply. Originally, this divine path was only the first trial, testing the physical limits of the elite. In the past 10,000 years, only 3 people had reached 900. But now, 4 people had broken the shackles within a breath's time. Moreover, Yaoguang Bodhisattva and the young master of the Ling people were even more terrifying than the crazy barbarian from the extreme south. Such a magnificent feat did not make everyone feel gratified. Instead, it made them feel a little worried. After all, it was only in chaotic times that so many elites and evildoers would suddenly appear to deal with the calamity. However, he didn't know how many of these people would be able to shake the Azure continent in the coming calamity. How many of them would become the stepping stones of others on the path of cultivation? It's a pity that the West Pole Bodhisattva will definitely not enter our academy to cultivate. That young lady with the bloodline should be from the Xian Yuan clan. Most likely, she will not stay here for long. That might not be the case. Zhong Tu smiled inexplicably. There was actually some excitement in his eyes. He heard that these few ladies were following the young master of the Ling people. As long as he could make that lad stay, perhaps they would all stay in the academy. The Array Formation Academy would welcome a great prosperity. This young master of the Ling people is indeed unparalleled in talent. In the crowd, Lu Ming sighed softly. He had always been resilient. But at this moment, when he saw that peerless figure in black walking alone, he still felt a little pressured. Even though he had many trump cards and had never revealed his true strength, but compared to Ling Xiao, he was still somewhat inferior. He was indeed the young man that senior sister fancied. It seemed that there was still a long way to go before he could win back senior sister's heart. Unparalleled in talent? Li Jichu turned her head, somewhat surprised. She glanced at Lu Ming and the corners of her lips curled into a beautiful arc. "No, young master is unparalleled in the world." What? Lu Ming's eyes trembled slightly and his face was gloomy. unparalleled in the world? Originally, he did not have much enmity toward Ling Xiao. If senior sister had not mentioned it, he would not even have the slightest interaction with such a noble young master of the ancient clan. But, inexplicably, she began to want to compete with him. Which young man didn't have a bit of pride in their hearts? Furthermore, Lu Ming had never revealed his means in public. Even if the young master of the Ling people had a terrifying physical body, he did not take him seriously. The reason being that he had a precious treasure that could defeat 10,000 enemies. You will know. But junior brother Lu is also very good. There are still 2 days before the final battle of the 4 academies. I believe that junior brother will definitely amaze the world. Li Jichu smiled sweetly, but she never looked at Lu Ming. Across thousands of miles of mountains and seas, there was only one person who caught his eye. On the divine path, Ling Xiao walked with his hands behind his back. His black robes fluttered in the wind, making him look otherworldly and exceptional. At this moment, he could sense that Yao Guang and the others were no longer behind him. It was obvious that their physical strength was no match for his demonic body. It was hard to imagine. Once he fused with the 6 demonic bones and forged the 3,000 sword bones, who in this world would be able to walk shoulder to shoulder with him. Look, who is it? At this moment there was an earth-shattering commotion on the mountain path again. Everyone looked up and saw a beautiful figure in black robes descending from the sky. Their eyes narrowed fiercely. It was a graceful and unparalleled figure. Her black phoenix robes were outlined with dark golden patterns. Her fine black hair was tied up in a bun with a jade hairpin. It was simple and elegant. Her loose emperor robes fluttered in the wind, revealing her snow-white slender neck. There was an inexplicable otherworldly charm to her. Her eyes were as clear as autumn water, and she was smart and elegant. That pair of bare feet was fair and tender, as bright as the moon. There was a touch of cold arrogance on her face. She was flawless. It's praising the Empress. Instantly, exclamations filled the air. Regardless of whether it was the proud sons or daughters, there was a strong sense of amazement on their faces. There is a beauty in the immortal phoenix who stands alone in the world. This ancient saying was personally written by Ling Xiao for Gu Chaoxiai. It seemed to be affectionate, but it contained a domineering aura that looked down on the world. However, when they saw this peerless celestial figure, everyone felt that it was reasonable and not exaggerated at all. If the young master was not here, there would probably be people cheering and admiring her, unable to control their emotions. Gu Chaoxiai YYDS. Boom. Gu Chaoxiai's figure descended from the sky, and there seemed to be a divine figure following under her feet. Then, she took a step and directly landed on the 900th step. She was casual and natural, as if she did not feel any pressure at all. Hiss! Sounds of cold air being sucked in immediately rang out. Everyone's faces were filled with disbelief. Everyone knew that this divine path was covered by divine power. Not to mention descending from the sky, even if she took a step, there would still be the pressure of heaven and earth above the 900th step. Could it be that this empress, who looked weak, also cultivated her physical body? Hearing the exclamations behind him, Ling Zhao's eyes turned cold. He turned around and saw Gu Chaoxiai walking over from afar with a cold expression. Her face immediately bloomed with radiance. In the past few days, Gu Chaoxiai intentionally or unintentionally avoided him, and did not give him a chance to be intimate with her at all. Originally, Ling Xiao thought that with such a temperament, she would most likely not show up for such a trial. After all, Gu Chaoxiai was already in the sequence. Moreover, she cultivated the peerless mantra of the mortal world, the Tao of Chaos. To her, the Mansion Master's lecture was not very attractive. However, he did not expect that she would still come. She descended from the sky in a domineering manner. Ling Xiao stopped and stood quietly at the peak of the mountain, as if he was waiting. Seeing this scene, the crowd on the mountain path was in an uproar. They watched as the beautiful figure finally stood beside Ling Xiao. Then, they gently held each other's hands. Boom! There was no light in heaven and earth, and the sun and moon admired each other. In particular, the two of them were wearing black emperor robes that were inexplicably compatible with each other. It caused the hearts of the various sects and clans to tremble, so much so that their Tao hearts fluctuated, and they felt as if they had nothing left to live for. What a pair of immortal couples! They were both otherworldly and had the same eternal talent. However, their love for each other did not waver, and they supported each other. This divine path was very similar to the immortal path. The higher one went, the more lonely one would be. It was a kind of fortune to have someone to walk side by side with. Suddenly, someone's heart was bleeding, and his expression was dispirited, as if he had fallen into madness. How can this be? Why, didn't Master say that this great Tao is heartless, and that one must be undistracted to have the opportunity to step onto the peak of the world? But why can Master Ling Xiao and praising the Empress be aroused and be invincible in this generation? This Tao is wrong. The Tao I'm cultivating is wrong. The originally peaceful ancient path instantly fell into chaos. Ling Xiao turned to look at the woman beside him. His gaze was gentle, and he smiled softly. Wife, have you rested well? Humph. Gu Chaoxiai snorted coldly, but did not answer. However, this time, she did not withdraw her hand. She allowed Ling Xiao to hold it as they walked towards the peak of the mountain. Ling Xiao, I will walk this path with you until the end. Until you stand on the peak of the mountain and give me a peaceful life. I only hope that you can stop and wait like you did today. Don't let me be too far away from you. The destined woman is determined. Congratulations to the host for obtaining 10,000 luck points and 100,000 villain points. Chapter 1209. Why on the Divine Path, Jean Han Er's red lips trembled. Her eyes were filled with panic. At this moment, there was no longer a trace of arrogance in her heart. There was only endless shock. Originally, she thought that even if Gu Chaoxiai was in the sequence and had extraordinary talent, it was not to the point where she needed to look up to her. However, at this moment, seeing her walk step by step to her master's side as if she was walking on flat ground, Jean Han finally understood. She had underestimated her master's taste. In the entire Azure continent, in terms of appearance and temperament, Gu Chaoxiai was unparalleled. Now she had proven her talent in front of everyone. It was truly enviable. It also made all the prides of the various sects and clans who yearned for her master realize that her master did not favor her only because of her appearance. It was also because of her strength that was on par with his. Perhaps it was because in the past few months, Ling Zhao's fame had grown and overshadowed Gu Chaoxiai's radiance. Now that she thought about it, this immortal Phoenix Empress had been in the sequence for hundreds of years. Her name was known throughout the 8 barren lands. Could it be that I can only look up to her? Jean Han shook her head and smiled bitterly. She felt like her entire body was deflated. She felt weak and almost fell down. How could it be this figure? At this moment, among the crowd, Zhang Juji's body was also trembling. He could only feel his heart beating violently. Since the moment Gu Chaoxiai appeared, he felt that she was somewhat familiar. Although he had heard of this immortal Phoenix Empress's name countless times, today was the first time he saw her. Inexplicably, her figure gradually overlapped with the peerless immortal figure in his mind. As a result, there was no difference. The same cold and aloof figure, the same flawless and graceful figure. Even the back of her figure was so similar. At this moment, the only thing Zhang Juji could not figure out was why this immortal Phoenix Empress, the fiancée of the Ling people's young master, wanted to kill him and Lei Yun. The three of them were not related at all. There was not a trace of hatred between them. If it was really her, wouldn't it be somewhat unreasonable? Could it be that there was really someone who looked so similar in this world? Even their temperament was exactly the same? No, I must find a chance to find out. Buzz. Just as everyone was shocked and envious of the two figures walking side by side, Ling Xiao and Gu Chaoxiai's footsteps stopped for the first time. 990 steps. This record had already broken the Daotian Academy's record since its establishment. In other words, even if the two of them stopped now, their names would go down in history and they would be respected by the world. Finally stopped. At this moment, all the geniuses were already numb from the shock of Ling Xiao and Gu Chaoxiai's monstrous talents. Both of them had the strength to crush a generation, yet they were so deeply in love with each other. It was hard to imagine how many people in the Azure Sky realm would be a match for them in another 100 years. Furthermore, from the looks of it, 2 more great emperors would be born in the Azure soon. Is my wife tired? Ling Xiao turned around and looked at the woman beside him with raised brows. Gu Chaoxiai's chaotic dragon phoenix deity body was indeed more terrifying than the sacred battle bodies in the Azure Sky realm. However, 990 divine steps seemed to be her limit. At this moment, Gu Chaoxiai's forehead was covered in sweat. Even the aura around her seemed to have dimmed. Hearing that, Gu Chaoxiai shook her head. Her eyes were firm and her peerless face was cold. Let's go. Then, she took a deep breath and lifted her foot. Suddenly, her body was surrounded by a divine aura. Roar. Chirp. The wind and clouds in the sky suddenly changed. Thousands of miles of tribulation clouds fell from the sky. The entire mountain of paths fell into the night. Among the layers of clouds, there seemed to be 2 giant figures entrenched. One was a dragon and the other a phoenix. They were alternating with each other. Endless visions flowed out of Gu Chaoxiai's body. Sacred mountains, great rivers, azure wood, and purple lightning. There seemed to be the river of time and the collapse of the magnificent palace. The aura of life and death flowed around her body. It was very mysterious. Her figure finally took a step forward and stood on the new flight of stairs. Ling Xiao shook his head and smiled. He could feel Gu Chaoxiai's hand suddenly tighten. It was obvious that she had used the chaotic dragon phoenix deity body to the extreme. My wife, do you remember what I said to you? Ling Xiao's tone was calm and his eyes seemed to have experienced the vicissitudes of life. Then, under everyone's dumbfounded gaze, he suddenly reached out and pulled Gu Chaoxiai into his arms. He lifted her up by the waist. Ling Xiao, I said that I won't let you feel a trace of evil in this world. Even the heavens and earth can't bully you. Ling Xiao lowered his head and smiled. However, the decisiveness in his words made Gu Chaoxiai's body tremble. She was inexplicably touched. Beat. The Lady of Destiny's Dao heart trembled, and she was extremely touched. Congratulations, host, for obtaining 10,000 luck points and 100,000 villain points. Ling Xiao, you and I don't need to talk anymore. I will split the heavens and earth for you. Ling Xiao's eyes glinted with evil. With a thought, he said, System, 3,000 sword bones. Add points to forge the will of heaven. Boom! On the divine path, the mountain wind gradually rose. A wisp of biting cold swept through the world like a cold autumn night. Wisps of sword intent wrapped around Ling Xiao's body. It was like a heavenly sword that pierced the clouds. Out of 3,000 sword bones, 500 had been formed. Beep, congratulations to the host for forging the will of heaven, 60%. A new system function has been unlocked. By killing those who are not destined, the host can plunder their physique and bloodline. Ling Xiao's smile grew wider. He looked down at the shy Gu Chaoxiai in his arms. Without any hesitation, he lifted his feet and walked towards the last 9 steps. Boom! Boom! The entire Dao mountain was filled with rolling thunder. Above Ling Xiao's head, endless divine lightning rolled and turned into a sea, trying to stop the young man's footsteps. However, the moment the lightning fell, sword intent shot out from Ling Xiao's body. The 3,000 immortal swords pierced through the sky and cut through everything. From afar, Ling Xiao seemed to be carrying the heavens on his back as he walked alone. That fearless posture inexplicably shocked people. What a terrifying sword intent! What a terrifying young master! This is what it means to be truly invincible. Azure Sword Immortal, there's one more person today. Gradually, everyone's reverence for Ling Xiao no longer had anything to do with his identity or background. That sword aura that could split the heavens and earth and destroy everything, even from a distance, made people tremble in fear. They did not dare to look directly at it. Even Yuan Tianji, who originally wanted to fight against Ling Xiao, was shaken the moment the sword intent cut through the sky. At this moment, he realized that some enemies would make people feel unreal if they stood too far away. That's right. His Tao was to fight. To fight with people, immortals, and heaven, he had to advance courageously. However, looking at the young man who held the Empress in his arms, carried the vast sea on his back, and split the heavens with his sword, he only felt a deep sense of powerlessness. It was a kind of insignificance that could not be seen from afar. Chapter 12:10. Boom, boom. Divine lightning fell and turned the mountain path into a silver sea. At this moment, everyone could only see the back of that peerless black-clothed figure. Step by step, he climbed to the top of the mountain at an extremely steady speed. At this moment, the eyes of many geniuses were rippling and their Taoist hearts were trembling. Not only because of Ling Xiao's strength, but also because of his unwavering love for the Empress. My wife, you don't believe me again. How can a mere mountain path stop my footsteps? Ling Xiao smiled gently and walked calmly. Around him, the great Tao began to awaken. Auspicious signs appeared. His footsteps finally reached the 998th step. He was only one step away from creating a new legend. Ling Xiao, the gate of immortality at the end of this ancient path, is the second trial of the Daotian Academy. There is an ancient tablet of immortality in there that can prove the Taoist rhythm of heaven. If you can leave your name on it, you will be respected by everyone and will be protected by the power of will. If you waste too much energy now, Gu Chaoxiai raised her head and looked at the handsome face that was close to her. She wanted to say something but stopped. She knew that with Ling Xiao's temper, he would definitely not admit defeat easily. However, the 999th step of the Divine Path was just a method used by the Daotian Academy to select the people who wanted to listen to the Daotian Academy's teachings. There was no fortune to be gained. However, the ancient tablet of immortality and the sage's wall of illusion that followed were genuine fortunes. They were also the foundation of the academy. Now, Ling Xiao was already seriously injured and had to bear the pressure of two people. If something happened to him, it would directly affect the next two trials. That's right. Ling Xiao's physical body was indeed incomparably strong. She had experienced it recently. That kind of terror almost caused her mind to collapse. However, the ancient tablet of immortality was a competition of one's Taoist rhythm and the sage's wall of illusion. It was also a trial of remarkable skills and technique. Ling Xiao was only in his early 20s. Compared to those monstrous geniuses who had cultivated for hundreds of years, he was really too young. It's fine. It would be too boring to travel alone at the end of the immortal path. Ling Xiao shook his head and smiled. His eyes were filled with determination. In the next moment, the 10,000 elephants rose around him. Flames covered the sky, divine lightning broke through the sun, time and space quietly stagnated. Roar! The dragon's shadow soared into the sky, shattering the tribulation clouds and divine sea. Every scale on it contained a great amount of divinity, and it was vivid and lifelike. At this moment, as if affected by the dragon's might, immortal light also rose around Gu Chaoxiai's body, transforming into a green phoenix image that tore through the void and intertwined with the dragon image. A Taoist rhyme swept across 90,000 miles, causing the sky to tremble. The celestial radiance of the sun bathed the mountain of Tao, creating layers of sacred scenery. As for Ling Xiao, he finally reached the last step and arrived before the gate of immortality. In his arms, Gu Chaoxiai's pretty face was filled with surprise. Her gaze was inexplicable. At this time, she seemed to feel a bloodline power of the same origin flowing from Ling Xiao's body, causing her mind to tremble. He went up, he really went up. No one has ever done it before. Shocked, dumbfounded. At this moment, on the mountain path, the faces of all the geniuses were filled with indescribable loneliness. The human sovereign was in the world, and the emperor's aura had appeared. The figure on the mountain peak suddenly turned into a mark that crushed everyone's heart, and it was impossible to erase it. In fact, even the Daotian Academy's 4 great hall masters and many elders had expressions of disbelief in their eyes. Since the establishment of the Daotian Academy, no one had ever set foot on the 999th path of immortality. 9 was the number of extremes, and it contained the laws of the great evolution. But now this young man, who was only in his early 20s, had actually reached the peak of perfection. The young master of the Ling people was indeed qualified to crush his generation. Moreover, from the beginning to the end, this young man did not seem to use his full strength. In other words, the peak of the divine path was not his limit. How ridiculous was this? In the past 100,000 years, although the Azure human race had declined slightly, there were still countless outstanding geniuses. But compared to the young master of the Ling people, they were not even worth mentioning. What sequence talent! What ancient monstrous genius! Now, it seemed that they would all be suppressed by Ling Xiao, and the dark era would be over. The human race was about to welcome a new human sovereign. Ling Xiao Gu Chaoxiai struggled down and stood beside Ling Xiao. There was an extremely complicated look in her beautiful eyes. He actually did it. Invincible, immortal beauty. This was nothing more than that. Buzz! Just as everyone on the mountain looked up at the 2 figures side by side on the mountain peak with trembling eyes, golden light suddenly rose from all sides of the ancient path. The divine power dissipated, and the sky was high and the clouds were clear. Ling Xiao and Gu Chaoxiai held hands and stepped into the gate of immortality, disappearing from sight. Ba! The relationship between the young master and the empress is really enviable. Yaoguang clasped his hands together and sighed softly. Hearing this, Xianyuan Weiyang nodded in a daze. There was undisguised longing on her face. They were walking side by side on the path to immortality. The union of the dragon and the phoenix, everlasting prosperity. The appearance of these two had completely overturned the merciless Tao of immortality. Especially the scene of Ling Xiao holding the empress in his arms and walking forward with difficulty, countless heaven's favorites were moved to tears. Their hearts could not calm down for a long time. It turns out that the word love is extremely profound. It can also push one's Tao heart forward. This pair of farts is beautiful and easy to eat. Hee, the Arhat's 6 senses are not pure. From afar, Jean Honor walked over slowly with a smile. The despondent look on her face was long gone. Now it seems that in the entire Azure continent, only Gu Chaoxiai can walk side by side with the young master. In the end, they can only serve as a foil for the Empress of the Immortal Phoenix. Let's go. It's time for the second test. In the end, Jean Han took a deep breath and walked towards the gate of immortality at the peak of the mountain. Behind her, Xianyuan Weiyang and Yaoguang looked at each other and followed. However, even though the heavenly qi had dissipated, those who failed to reach the 500th step found it difficult to take another step forward. A ray of light turned into an enchantment that blocked off the path and divided the world into 2. As for those disciples who failed to pass the trial, a deep sense of loss appeared on their faces, and they were unwilling to leave. But, even so, there were still tens of thousands of heaven's favorites who entered the gate of immortality. Buzz! Only when Ling Xiao and the Empress stepped into the gate of immortality did the world before them open up. This place was a square paved with green jade. It was boundless and contained the sky. There were Taoist rhythms that turned into a sea of stars and covered the sky. Around the square, there were layers of heavenly trees and divine plants. The atmosphere was magical. In the middle of the square there was a heavenly ancient stele quietly. It was crystal clear and enshrouded in Taoist light. Upon closer inspection, there were golden words on the ancient stele. Divine runes appeared, and they were the names of people. Endless Taoist rhythms intertwined and formed a sea. The closer one got to the ancient stele, the more refreshed one felt. There were signs of spiritual energy boiling. Ling Xiao raised his eyebrows slightly. He held Gu Chaoxiai's hand and walked to the front of the stele. There were tens of thousands of names on it. At the second position of the ancient stele, a familiar name appeared. Chapter 12:11. Ling Tianlin. Ling Zhao's eyes were clear, but his expression did not change much. He knew long ago that Ling people avoided the world. Before he came to Qingtsang, no one had ever walked the earth. But hundreds of years ago, a peerless sword immortal suddenly appeared in Qingtsang and stirred up a storm. Then, he disappeared without a trace. Although people did not know his name, they called him the white-robed immortal. Obviously, this person should be Ling Tianlin. But what surprised Ling Xiao was that even with Ling Tianlin's talent, he was only ranked second. Above it, there was another name that caught his eye. Junhanch. Master. Ling Xiao only turned to look at the entrance when he heard Jin Han Er's voice. Then, countless people rushed over and made a deafening noise. Yao Guang and Xianyuan Weiyang took the initiative to keep a distance from Ling Xiao, their eyes full of caution. Now, it seemed that Yao Guang was no match for Gu Chaoxiai even though they were both in the same sequence. Given the nature of this empress and her decisiveness in killing, if they unintentionally provoked her, they would probably be turned into a bowl of fresh human meat soup. Only Jin Han walked up to Ling Xiao and Ling Xiao with a bright face and bowed respectfully. Master, the second trial tests one's Taoist rhyme and spiritual opportunity. Those who can leave their names on this monument are the true prodigies of the human race. Jin Han explained patiently playing the role of a maid. Oh! Ling Zhao's eyebrows twitched as he stared at the top 10 names. Other than Ling Tianlin, the Divine Martial Emperor and the Lord of Tiankei Prefecture were all on it. Also, those who can enter the trial were the younger generation. The strongest one is only in the Saint realm. Master and the Empress, with your talents, you can leave your names here and be respected by the world. Boom! Just as Jin Han Er's voice fell, a few prodigies from the various clans suddenly made their moves in front of the ancient tablet. They either used their spiritual powers to suppress the ancient tablet, or used their powers of Tao laws to envelop it. However, there wasn't even the slightest ripple on the stone tablet, and their names didn't even appear for a moment. Let's give it a try. Ling Xiao nodded indifferently. Behind him, Xianyuan Weiyang and Yao Guang looked at each other before walking towards the ancient monument. Around the two women, Buddhist light and blood qi rose, transforming into divine signs. Then, everyone's eyes were filled with shock when they saw that the originally sparkling and translucent ancient tablet suddenly lit up with a golden glow, while a bloody glow danced about. Yao Guang's and Xianyuan Weiyang's names also rose from the bottom of the monument to the top. In the end, Yao Guang's name stopped at the 30th place, while Xianyuan Weiyang was in the 100th place. As for the two names at the bottom of the monument, they completely dimmed and dissipated, leaving no trace behind. As expected of the Bodhisattva of the West Pole. Such talent is unparalleled even in history. Princess Xianyuan isn't bad either. She's in the top 100 of the human race, and already has the opportunity to reach the peak of the Supreme Being realm. A commotion broke out. Shen Jingan, Wu Hongxi, and the others also stepped forward, exerting all their strength to send a palm strike towards the ancient tablet. Especially Shen Jingan, the spear around her transformed into a long dragon, shattering the void as it pierced downwards. Buzz buzz. The ancient tablet buzzed incessantly, and the glow on it alternated. It was just that compared to Yaoguang, their talent was more than a level weaker. Therefore, even if their names were left on the tablet, most of them were in the thousands. Even so, these people were already the top of their generation. Daoist Tianji, why don't we give it a try too? Wu Lei's eyes were filled with longing as he turned to look at Yuan Tianji beside him. The two of them walked side by side and brazenly attacked. Layers of Daoist rhymes surged, crushing the heavens and earth as they crashed onto the tablet. Unfortunately, even though Yuan Tianji was arrogant and considered himself invincible, he was only ranked in the top 7,000. On the other hand, although Wu Lei's physical body was weak, his Daoist rhymes could be considered profound. He actually suppressed Yuan Tianji and was ranked in the top 6,700. Junior sister, let's give it a try too. Yang Yuan took a deep breath. Although he had suffered some injuries on the divine path just now, how could he let go of such an opportunity to show off so easily? Although Ling Zhao's talent shocked him, Yang Yuan believed that if he was given a little more time to find the reincarnation divine palace, his achievements might not be below this young master of the Ling people. Go ahead. Xia Zhiming shook her head. Although her expression was calm, her eyes never left the black-robed figure. Okay. Yang Yuan nodded slightly. He walked to the front of the tablet and took a deep breath. Golden light shone around his body. At first, it was only a wisp, but soon it was as bright as the sun. Furthermore, at this moment, everyone could see that his bones were emitting a jade-like luster through his flesh and blood. Immortal chi lingered around him. He clenched his fist and slowly accumulated power. An oppressive aura suddenly descended, instantly attracting the attention of countless geniuses present. Everyone's attention. At this moment, Yang Yuan only felt his heart surging, and his body was filled with inexhaustible power. Then, he punched out, shattering the void within 100 miles and fiercely imprinted on the tablet. It did not move at all. There wasn't even a trace of profound light that lit up on the ancient tablet. The silence lasted for a moment before it was broken by roars of laughter. Ha 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 ha, holy shit. Just now, when I saw his posture, I thought that he was going to shatter the ancient heavenly tablet. Why does Yang Yuan like to show off so much? His face still doesn't hurt. Some people always think that they are destined to be the center of attention wherever they go. Buzz. Just as the crowd was bustling with noise, and everyone was looking at the white-clothed youth in front of the stone tablet with ridicule, a strange buzzing sound suddenly rang out in the entire space. Golden light suddenly appeared, and the divine transformation sun rose. At the bottom of the tablet, a wisp of dazzling golden light shot into the sky and rushed toward the top of the tablet at a terrifying speed. Shen Jingan, Wu Hongqiu, Yuan Tianji, and Wu Lei's names were drowned out by that wisp of golden light. Among all the geniuses present, except for Ling Xiao and Gu Chaoci, who had yet to make a move, only Yaoguang and Xianyuan Weiyang were above Yang Yuan. Gradually, the rising speed of the golden light quietly slowed down, but it still continued to climb with an indomitable momentum. In the end, Yang Yuan's name appeared in the 109th position. He was only 7 places away from Princess Xianyuan. How is this possible? How can Yang Yuan have such a terrifying Dao mechanism? The crowd was in an uproar. At this moment, many disciples' faces were filled with fear and shock. Just now, Yang Yuan had already proven his physical talent on the divine path. But who would have thought that this ordinary-looking and ordinary young man would also have such talent in Tao mechanism and spiritual aura? Could it be that he already had the strength to contend with the sequence? However, seeing this scene, Ling Zhao's face did not have a trace of surprise. It was normal for the Son of Destiny to counterattack and slap the face. Usually, the more ridicule there was, the more intense the reversal of the plot would be. In Ling Zhao's opinion, the one who should be showing off on the tablet was not Yang Yuan, but Zhang Jiuji. Chapter 12:12. Good Fortune Saint Body, Dark Tribulation Divine Lightning. Although Zhang Jiuji's physical body might not be stronger than Yang Yuan's, but in terms of comprehension of the great Tao and spirituality, this little disciple of the Nihility Tao sect definitely couldn't compare to him. After all, the word good fortune was the essence of heaven and earth. Therefore, there was a high chance that this ancient tablet trial was Zhang Jiuji's show of strength. Wife, let's give it a try too? Ling Xiao smiled and ignored everyone's shock. Gu Chaozi nodded. She lifted her foot and stood in front of the tablet. Instantly, the originally noisy square fell into silence. Everyone looked expectantly at the two black-clothed figures standing side by side. Their expressions were somewhat complicated. With Gu Chaozi and Ling Zhao's talent, they would definitely leave their names on the ancient tablet for future generations to look up to. Their rankings would definitely be above Yaoguang's, but no one knew if they could enter the top 10. One had to know that the names on the ancient tablet didn't include all the peerless geniuses in the Azure world in the past 100,000 years, but to be able to stand in the top 100 of the ancient tablet was a taboo of the same generation. At this moment, Gu Chaozi raised her head and looked at the top of the ancient tablet. In the next moment she suddenly stretched out her hand. Buzz! The roar of a dragon and the cry of a phoenix resounded. In Gu Chaozi's palm, there seemed to be thousands of divine runes that shone brightly. Vaguely, on her back, a pair of green phoenix wings stretched for thousands of miles. Every feather on the wings contained supreme divine intent and emitted a terrifying immortal aura. On the ancient tablet, there was a 7-colored radiance that shot into the sky and evolved into thousands of strange phenomena. The entire square was silent. Everyone's eyes trembled as they looked at the auspicious clouds that covered the sky. They looked at Gu Chaozi, who was like an ancient empress standing in front of everyone, indifferent and eternal. Especially under the contrast of the phoenix wings, she was like a fallen immortal, ethereal and ethereal, both calm and demonic. Two different temperaments that shouldn't have appeared at the same time were perfectly fused into one person. At this moment, even the most determined heaven's favorites were stunned by the silhouette of an immortal who was wearing an emperor's robe and had black hair dancing in the wind. Unfortunately, her eyes were always as cold as the night. Only when she looked at the young master would she reveal a trace of smoke. Boom! Finally, when the light from the ancient tablet dissipated, an uproar instantly sounded out. As for Gu Chaozi's name, it directly climbed to the top of the Tao monument, only below Jun Hanch. She was ranked second on the Tao monument in the past 100,000 years. Too scary. The Empress's talent is simply too frightening. It seems like the Empress will step into the true Great Emperor realm sooner or later. Perhaps our human race will have a chance to rise. Praising the Empress. Independent from the world. However, at this moment, although Ling Zhao's face showed a trace of surprise, it wasn't because of Gu Chaozi's ranking, but because of the name Jun Hanch. Based on Gu Chaozi's providence, it was hard to find anyone in the Azure world who could be compared to her. The Chaos Dragon Phoenix immortal body was a fusion of the Chaos Tao and the true Dragon Phoenix bloodline. Except for Ling Zhao's Sky Demon body, it was hard to find anyone who could be compared to her. Not only did Jun Hanch suppress Ling Tianlin, but even Gu Chaozi couldn't break his ranking. However, this was the first time Ling Xiao heard of this name. Who is he? Second. He's actually the second most talented person in the past 100,000 years. Jean Han Er's red lips trembled, and her eyes were filled with shock. In terms of divine Tao, she still felt that she had a chance to be compared to the Empress Immortal Phoenix. However, at this moment, Jean Han Er didn't even dare to go to the ancient tablet to verify her Daoji talent. Regardless of whether it was Yao Guang or Xianyuan Weiyang, they were both true geniuses of the Azure world. One was ranked, and the other was the daughter of the human emperor. However, they were both ranked outside the top 30, and Jean Han Er was probably even lower. Therefore, how could she compare to Gu Chaoci? Although the ancient tablet of Tao only recorded the Daoji rankings of those who came to listen to the scripture trial, Gu Chaoci's talent was unimaginable to be ranked second on the list of 10,000 in the past 100,000 years. It turned out that there was really a world of difference. Wife, have you heard of the name Jun Hanch? Ling Xiao raised his head and looked at the beautiful figure in the phoenix robe walking towards him with a gentle smile. Hearing this, Gu Chaoci shook her head and said calmly, "This is also the first time I've seen this name. Perhaps it's someone from tens of thousands of years ago." Throughout history, there were indeed countless people with such amazing talent. However, there were only a few who could truly become a great emperor and live forever. The path to immortality was filled with dangers. No matter how monstrous a person was, if they didn't have the protection of luck, they could still die young from natural disasters. Oh, even if he had the protection of providence, it seemed that he would still die. Is that so? Ling Xiao nodded indifferently, but he had some guesses in his heart. Jun Hanch? Did you hear how awesome this name was? Could he be a minor character who had nothing to do with the plot? Boom, 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 boom. Around the ancient tablet, one figure after another walked up to the stele and tried their best to occupy a spot on the stele. However, after Gu Chaoci made her move, only the young master of the Nangong clan, Nangong Bieha, managed to make it to the top 10,000 with the Nangong clan's secret technique, the divine wheel of heavenly wood. This was somewhat unexpected. Ling Xiao had seen Nangong clan's young master at the Wanjiao banquet. However, this person did not have any providence and was rather stable, so he did not attract Ling Xiao's attention. However, at this moment, looking at the young man who was full of vitality, Ling Xiao's eyes flashed with a hint of playfulness for the first time. Gradually, the boom disappeared, and everyone's gaze unconsciously landed on Ling Xiao. Obviously, many people wanted to know if this young master's strength compared to the previous monstrous talents, who was stronger and who was weaker. Young master, aren't you going to try? The ranking on this ancient tablet will directly affect the seats to listen to the scripture. Jean Han stood behind Ling Xiao and reminded him softly. Oh! Hearing this, Ling Xiao shook his head and smiled. Seeing that everyone was looking at him, he lifted his leg and walked towards the ancient tablet. Even if I give you time to catch up on this path to immortality, those who can see my backbone in the end can also be called emperors in the mortal world. Looking at the figure of the young man who slowly stepped out, everyone felt suffocated and their eyes were filled with excitement. Young master, can you create another miracle? Until Ling Xiao stopped and looked up at the densely packed and dazzling golden names, there was not a trace of emotion on his face. The human race's genius, who can leave his name and be respected by all. In this world, you only need to respect me, and that's enough. Buzz! Suddenly, a gust of wind blew in the void. It was gentle and unruffled, without any ripples. However, inexplicably, everyone felt a chill rising from the bottom of their feet, as if they had seen something ominous. It was extremely terrifying. Chapter 12-13. Buzz! Ling Xiao stretched out his hand, but there was not a single ripple on his body. His fair and slender palm seemed to be carved out of the finest white jade. It was flawless and sparkling as it gently imprinted itself on the ancient heavenly steel. Unlike the other sky prides who had given their all, rather than saying that Ling Xiao was training, it was more accurate to say that he was touching the ancient heavenly steel in front of him. It was like meeting an old friend. It was so gentle that it caused ripples in the hearts of many sky prides. They could not help but imagine how it would feel to be touched by such a gentle palm. The entire square was dead silent. At that moment, no one doubted that Ling Xiao's name would be in the top 10 of the ancient heavenly steel. They were just curious if this young master was able to suppress Qin Song for 100,000 years and become the strongest. However, the strange thing was that there was not a single ray of light on the ancient heavenly steel. It was as if Lord Ling Xiao had really touched the ancient heavenly steel. "Let's go." Until Ling Xiao turned around and walked to Gu Chaoxiai's side, held her hand, and walked towards the end of the square. The sky prides around the ancient heavenly steel were still in a daze. Huh? He's leaving just like that? Everyone looked at each other. Obviously, they did not understand what Ling Xiao was trying to do. But, at that moment, there was a soft, shattering sound in the square. Immediately after, some people started to exclaim in shock. "Look, the ancient heavenly steel, shattered!" "What?" Instantly, the entire square was in an uproar. Countless people stared at the terrifying crack that penetrated from the bottom of the ancient heavenly steel. Other than fear, there was nothing else in their eyes. How could it be? The ancient heavenly steel, the most precious treasure of the academy, could not withstand the Taoist rime of the young master's palm? He had not used any strength. How could the ancient heavenly steel shatter? Crack, crack. The originally crystal-clear ancient heavenly steel was instantly filled with countless cracks. The golden names engraved on it finally dimmed and disappeared at this moment. Only that peerless figure in black was free and unrestrained. It was as if he didn't notice the movement behind him at all as he led the Empress away. In the crowd, Yang Yuan clenched his fist. His eyes were filled with shock. He only felt that this was ridiculous. "We are both made of flesh and blood, but why are you so outstanding?" He had a supreme background, a peerless beauty, and a peerless talent. Yet, he had a wife who was as beautiful as a painting. Could it be that the luck of heaven and earth was really on this young master of the Ling people? "How did you do it?" Gu Chaoxiai turned her head and looked at the calm-looking young man beside her with a confused expression. Suddenly, she seemed to realize that she really didn't recognize this young man. In a short span of 3 years, he had grown from a youth from the lower realm whom she had regarded as an ant to someone whom she had to look up to. The ancient Tao Heaven Tablet had stood for 100,000 years. During this period of time, countless monstrous geniuses had come here to train, but not a single one of them had been able to shake even a corner of him. But, today, Ling Xiao had only stretched out his palm. He didn't use any spiritual power, and that ancient tablet had shattered. The true form of the sky demon was actually so terrifying? But he clearly didn't use any of the sky demon's aura just now. How exactly did he do it? Furthermore, in Gu Chaoxiai's opinion, it was extremely difficult for even the sky demon to achieve such a feat in a short span of 3 years. "Ling Xiao, what exactly did you experience?" "What do you mean, how did I do it?" Ling Xiao raised his eyebrows slightly. Seeing that Gu Chaoxiai's eyes were gradually turning cold, he smiled faintly and said, "I just stretched out my hand to touch that stone tablet. It seemed to be a little afraid of me, and it cracked open on its own." "It cracked open on its own." Gu Chaoxiai nodded seriously and didn't ask anything else. Seeing this scene, Ling Xiao's expression turned serious. Then, he laughed bitterly. "Has it already reached such a stage? She believes everything I say. But why hasn't the system acknowledged me as its master? What is she worried about?" Inexplicably, Ling Xiao's eyes flashed with a hint of coldness. However, the smile on his face became gentler. That ancient tablet could indeed differentiate one's talent based on spiritual power. But now, Ling Xiao already had more than 20 types of spiritual power. Moreover, they were all at the perfect realm. In Ling Xiao's opinion, it was absolutely impossible for someone to integrate so many spiritual powers and cultivate them to the perfect realm, let alone in azure heaven. In other words, if Ling Xiao could one day meet a monster like him who had comprehended dozens of spiritual powers in this world, then that person would definitely be a dog who added points to the system. There's only one last trial left, right? Ling Xiao raised his head and looked at the 7-colored divine wall standing at the end of his vision. At this moment, he could feel that the wall seemed to contain an extremely mysterious power. It was like an illusion, but it was surging with true killing intent. Yes, Sage Illusory Wall. Gu Chaoxiai nodded slightly. Her eyes revealed a rare trace of seriousness. It was very obvious that even with her cultivation talent, she felt a little apprehensive in the face of this trial. Sage Illusory Wall? It's the classic moves left behind by the geniuses who came here to train in the past. There are even some Dao Law origins. As long as you defeat the afterimage, you can obtain the creation within. There were thousands of divine patterns in Gu Chaoxiai's eyes. Her phoenix robe fluttered in the absence of wind. It was obvious that she was prepared for the trial. She didn't care about the techniques and moves. The Emperor Dao Dragon Phoenix Sutra was a supreme classic. It was also compatible with her bloodline. In fact, the Chaos Dao Law that she used to seal her child had been completely awakened now. Therefore, she was more concerned about the Dao Law power left behind by the human race's ancestors and ancient monsters. Her Chaos Dao Law could integrate all things. It was the power closest to the creation realm's origin. Therefore, if she could integrate some of the Dao Law power that had accumulated for 100,000 years in the illusory wall, her cultivation would definitely enter the sage realm. Dao Law origins? Ling Xiao's eyes turned cold. Wasn't this a coincidence? What kind of colored wall was this? It was simply a creation specially prepared for him. Could it be that as his destiny casting value increased, he had already begun to enjoy the treatment of a son of destiny? Oh no. This trial should be prepared for Gu Chaoxiai. Ling Xiao raised his head and looked at the ancient wall in front of him. Distinctionless education? At this moment, he very easily understood why the human race's monsters were willing to put a wisp of Dao Law power into the illusory wall. Given the Daotian Academy's status in Qingtsang, it was not an exaggeration to say that it was the human race's sacred ground. Moreover, those who could come here to train were mostly people who admired the Daotian Academy's master. As long as the old man spoke with emotion and reason, and put a hat of righteousness on the human race's monstrous geniuses, there would definitely be people who would be willing to take the initiative to contribute their strength. However, inexplicably, Ling Xiao suddenly felt that the Daotian Academy's master's strategy was far from as simple as he had imagined. It was obvious that he had put in so much effort to preach the scriptures for the trial. Perhaps it wasn't as simple as the world thought. In the struggle of the immortal path, one had to redeem oneself in order to redeem others. A heavenly supreme, who had yet to step foot on the peak of the world and didn't want to enter the Dharch realm, was taking on the responsibility of the human race all day long? Was this reasonable? Chapter 12-14. Ling Xiao. There are countless human experts' images in the Wall of Illusion. Also, I heard that although these images do not have consciousness, the Wall of Illusion is full of spiritual aura. Therefore, no one knows what kind of monsters are hidden in it, so… Gu Chaoxiai wanted to say something but stopped. Before she finished speaking, she laughed self-mockingly. Given Ling Xiao's strength, since he could destroy the ancient Dao tablet, these images could not threaten him at all. My wife, are you concerned about me? Ling Xiao smiled faintly, but there was not a trace of emotion in her eyes. At this moment, He suddenly had some guesses. Gu Chao Ci was clearly in love, but she was still unwilling to submit. It seemed that the worries in her heart were too deep. Could it be, the power of the Tao laws in the wall of illusion is the most precious creation among the three trials? Only those who have left their names on the ancient Tao tablet can enter. Let's go and fight for more. Gu Chao Ci ignored Ling Xiao's teasing and walked into the wall of illusion first. Ling Xiao looked coldly at the beautiful figure in front of him. In the end, he did not hesitate and walked into the wall of illusion. Ling Xiao did not have much interest in these so-called remnants of the human race's monstrous talents. The only thing he was curious about was the first place on the Tao tablet called Jun Hanch. He did not know if this person had left his image in the wall. What was his identity? To be able to suppress Gu Chao Ci, this person's talent was imaginable. However, he did not know how much luck he had. Buzz! When Ling Xiao's figure appeared in the wall of illusion, he saw a towering ancient mountain. The ancient mountain was majestic, and fog surged. The vegetation was flourishing, and there were layers of immortal aura. Spiritual radiance sprinkled on it, condensing into colorful Tao laws of order. However, the most frightening thing was that on the 9 perfectly straight mountain paths around the ancient mountain, there were numerous figures standing quietly like statues, emitting an aura that caused one's heart to palpitate. This place was like an independent sect, and the spiritual shadow in the mountain was probably the evildoer's shadow that Gu Chao Ci mentioned. Did you notice that this mountain is somewhat similar to the ancient Tao Heaven tablet from before? Ling Xiao raised his head and looked at the top of the ancient mountain. His eyes suddenly surged with fighting spirit. For 100,000 years, although there were no changes to the azure sky, monstrous geniuses still emerged in large numbers. However, in an era, there could only be one ultimate powerhouse. Now that the top figures of each era had gathered here, it inexplicably gave people the urge to compete. If that's the case, the strength of the mountain mirage is also related to the position one is standing on. Gu Chao Ci nodded slightly and turned to Ling Xiao. There are 9 battle paths here. Ling Xiao, choose one. My wife doesn't intend to be with me. Ling Xiao raised his eyebrows slightly, but Gu Chao Ci shook her head gently. No. At this moment, she was not conceited. Her talent was indeed enough to dominate all of eternity. However, on each mountain path, there were at least 1,000 famous evildoers standing tall. These people had all stunned the world for a period of time in the past 100,000 years. Therefore, even Gu Chao Ci could not suppress the entire mountain path with her own strength. However, she did not come here just to see Ling Xiao. Pooh, she was not here to sightsee. Now that her cultivation level had fallen and she was trapped in the honorable realm, the shackles could not be broken by ordinary spiritual pills and spiritual materials. The Tao law and immortal rhythm in these spiritual shadows was a great supplement for the chaos that she cultivated. This was an opportunity. If she was lucky, she could enter the Sage Realm again. In the Azure Sky sect, the Sage Realm was already the cornerstone of a sect. If the Honorable Realm did not appear, the Sage Realm was the highest. Originally, after using the Chaos Great Tao to seal the blood bone, Gu Chao Ci thought that it would be difficult for her to break out of this realm and return to the peak in this lifetime. However, now it seemed that all these worries were broken after Ling Xiao ascended to the upper realm and her Tao heart stabilized. Indeed, in this immortal path, the Tao heart was the most important. Then be careful. Ling Xiao nodded indifferently. He had never worried about Gu Chao Ci's safety. Even if Ling Xiao wanted to kill her with 100,000 providence points, it would take a lot of effort. As for the dead objects on the mountain path, they were just stepping stones. Buzz. However, just as the two of them each chose a mountain path and were about to start this journey of rebellion, a buzzing sound suddenly came from the distant space. Immediately after, the Azure Sky sect evildoers who left their names on the ancient tablet appeared one after another. Even Yao Guang and Xianyuan Weiyang appeared at the entrance of the illusory wall and looked at the ancient mountain in front of them in shock. Are these the so-called remnants of the ancient sage? As long as they are still alive, I'm afraid they are all overlords now. The Daotian Academy is indeed the sacred land of the human race. As long as one is talented enough, they can cultivate and integrate the cultivation methods and Tao laws of these ancient sages to strengthen the future generations. That's right. The Daotian Academy's way of doing things is the true righteousness of the human race. What are you waiting for? Let's give it a try. Compared to Wu Hongxi, Shen Jing'an, and the others, Yuan Tianji and Wu Lei were undoubtedly more excited. Of these two, one was a warrior. Wherever he went, there would be a battlefield. Now that he was facing so many ancient evildoers, he could no longer suppress the throbbing in his heart and strode forward with his halberd. As for Wu Lei, needless to say, his divine body cultivated the Tao of integration. He only needed to observe the cultivation methods used by these remnants. There was no need to defeat them. It was already a great opportunity. With that thought in mind, Wu Lei did not choose a battle path. Instead, he followed behind Yuan Tianji and walked toward one of the paths. Arhat, shall we give it a try? Xianyuan Weiyang raised her head and looked at the two figures who had already walked to the foot of the mountain peak. Her eyes were inexplicably deep. Ba, this little monk cultivates Buddhist karma. These remnants were created by enlightened masters and have many implications. As such, it's better not to touch them. Yao Guang shook her head. She had come here purely to witness the Azure Feast. As for the Academy Lord's lecture and the Myriad Talents Feast, they were not attractive to her. Although this sage illusionary wall contained a great opportunity, it was still a great opportunity. However, opportunities were causes and consequences. As for whether they were good or evil, they were ultimately implicated. All right, then I'll give it a try. Xianyuan Weiyang nodded slightly, a rare trace of seriousness appearing on her pretty face. What she lacked now was not talent or cultivation, but the true tempering of life and death. Although there were experts from the Daotian Academy guarding the wall of illusion, there was no danger to her life. However, those remnants were all emotionless killing machines. It was a challenge. Unknowingly, this human princess's temperament seemed to have changed. The path to immortality was full of waves. Who would be willing to settle down? Eldest princess. Jing'an, if you want to go, then go. I won't go for this kind of fighting and killing. Cough cough. Wu Hongxi coughed twice. Seeing Shen Jing nod silently and leave with her spear, she lifted her foot and walked toward Yao Guang. A smile suddenly appeared on her pretty face. Yao Guang, Arhat. Ba, eldest princess. Yao Guang's eyes were emotionless. No one could tell whether he was happy or angry. I didn't expect that Yao Guang, Arhat, would come to such a noisy place. Wu Hongxi smiled gently. She did not care about Yao Guang's indifference. Her beautiful eyes suddenly flashed with a trace of deep meaning. I wonder if you have time to come to my martial emperor city after this trip? Chapter 12-15. Ba. The cause and effect of this trip are unknown. Please forgive me for not agreeing to your request, princess. Yao Guang shook his head slightly. From the moment he saw Wu Hongxi, he had sensed a faint trace of evil from her. However, this evil aura did not come from her bloodline. It was more like it was planted by someone else. The eldest princess of the Shenwu dynasty was extremely talented and had a powerful cultivation. However, she was plagued by a strange illness that could not be cured. It was obvious that there was something fishy about this. However, the more it was like this, the more serious the cause and effect of this woman was. Once she was involved, it was unknown whether it would be a blessing or a curse. Haha, there's no hurry. I'll invite you after the trip to the academy is over. Wu Hongxi was not in a hurry. She bowed calmly and turned to look at the black-clothed figure at the foot of the mountain in the distance. According to her observation, Yaoguang seemed to have an extremely close relationship with the young master of the Ling people for some reason. Even before coming to Heaven Path City, she already knew that the two of them had been inseparable recently. Given Master Ling Zhao's hatred for evil spirits, perhaps she could ask him to come to Martial Emperor City with the Arhat as a guest. This way, the crisis would be resolved. Boom! Just as Wu Hongxi was pondering, Gu Chaoxiai, Yuan Tianji, Yang Yuan, Shen Jing'an, and the others stepped forward at the same time and walked up the mountain. Suddenly, the sky was filled with multicolored light and divine light. The entire illusory space was rippled by waves of spiritual power and emitted a blinding brilliance. At first, everyone's footsteps were still light and relaxed. They suppressed the illusions along the way and displayed supreme elegance. However, the more they fought, the faster their spiritual power was depleted. Even with Yuan Tianji and Shen Jing'an's strength, they were unable to defeat the 10th illusion. They were all blocked and forced to retreat. I don't believe that I, Yuan Tianji, can't even defeat a single illusion. To be honest, the successive blows had already shaken the War Emperor's heart. After all, Ling Xiao and Gu Chaoxiai's talents were too terrifying. It was like a huge mountain with no walls on all sides and was difficult to surmount. Even if Yuan Tianji had cultivated the Tao of invincibility for 300 years, it was nothing more than a joke in front of the two of them. Furthermore, even Yang Yuan, this nameless person who popped out of nowhere, actually crushed him in all aspects. This anger, Yuan Tianji truly found it hard to swallow. Boom! Just as Yuan Tianji was feeling furious, an illusory figure holding an ancient sword silently floated in front of him. The ancient sword was 3 feet long, overflowing with spiritual might as it brazenly slashed out. A strand of surging sword insight that was visible to the eye descended with a bang, and it was like a curtain of rain that formed boundless Tao insights. Yuan Tianji narrowed his eyes and hurriedly raised the black halberd in his hand, wanting to block the sword intent. However, the moment the dragon halberd collided with the sword intent, Yuan Tianji's expression suddenly froze. At this moment, he only felt a vast sword intent surging like the waves of the sea. Even with his celestial combat body, he could not withstand the sword momentum and was instantly sent flying backward, spitting out blood. Overlapping waves sword technique, 10,000 Cs returned to 1. But, before his figure landed on the ground, the spirit shadow soared into the sky again, surrounded by sword insight that turned into an endless sea and covered the sky, wanting to completely annihilate him. Damn it! Yuan Tianji's expression changed greatly, and for the first time, panic appeared in his eyes. Then, a battle radiance seemed to light up around him, turning into an ancient battle shadow out of thin air. With a momentum that could trample the sky, it blocked the sea of swords above his head. Above the battle shadow, a domineering aura of the great Tao awakened, despising the universe and looking down on heaven and earth. Boom! The sword radiance fell, and thousands of sword insights bloomed from the sky. Every strand of them could easily pierce through the sky. In the end, Yuan Tianji's figure fell under the battle path under everyone's dumbfounded gazes. At this moment, the spirit shadow that was originally standing in the sky suddenly seemed to have come to a standstill. It landed on the mountain path again, motionless like a statue. Pfft! A trace of blood flowed from the corner of Yuan Tianji's mouth, and his eyes trembled as he looked into the distance. At this moment, he could feel that as the battle shadow shattered, his body had been filled with sword intent. If it wasn't for his innate battle physique, this sword strike would have been enough to break his meridians. How is this possible? At this moment, Yuan Tianji finally felt a trace of powerlessness. It was as if his invincible battle path had come to an end. Especially Ling Zhao's existence, it had caused an irreparable crack to appear in his originally flawless Tao heart. At the same time, Shun Jing'an's figure was also sent flying by a spirit shadow. The silver spear in his hand fell, and the blood energy around his body seemed to have dissipated. Only Yang Yuan, Xian Yuan Weiyang, and Gu Chao Ci were still surrounded by spirit radiance, which turned into golden radiance, blood sea, and dragon phoenix sacred might. They fought all the way, defeating hundreds of spirit shadows in a row, and were in the limelight. What is Master Ling Xiao doing? At the entrance of the illusory wall, Wu Hongxi suddenly exclaimed, instantly attracting everyone's attention. In front of the battle path, Ling Xiao's figure never took a step forward. Instead, he coldly looked at Yuan Tianji and Shen Jing'an's defeat, and the corner of his mouth suddenly raised into a faint smile. At this moment, he could feel that the battle strength of these spirit shadows was mainly focused on offense. In other words, their defense was basically negligible. Whether it was Shun Jing'an or Yuan Tianji, they both gave their opponents a chance to attack before they were defeated. With that thought, Ling Xiao suddenly took a step forward, and there seemed to be lightning winding around his body. In the illusory wall, a violent wind suddenly blew, and black clouds gathered. And that peerless black-clothed figure turned into an afterimage and rushed toward the top of the battle path. Instantly, on the mountain path, countless spirit shadows woke up from their slumber. Monstrous chi began to recover, and they turned to chase after that streak of flowing light. Boom! In the void, multicolored light wantonly. All kinds of laws and orders intertwined into chains like an invisible net, imprisoning heaven and earth, and reversing yin and yang. Thousands of human clans' spirit shadows woke up at the same time. Just their might alone was enough to shake the heavens and earth. Moreover, these people were the real elites ranked on the ancient Tao Heaven Tablet. Thousands of people fighting at the same time was shocking. In the academy, when the 4 hall masters and countless disciples saw this scene, their faces were filled with intense shock. Obviously, they couldn't understand what the young master of the Ling people, who had an ancient talent and shattered the ancient Tao Heaven Tablet, wanted to do. Until Ling Xiao's figure stood at the top of the battle path, and his eyes narrowed when he saw the spirit shadow standing at the top of the mountain. At this moment, he could feel that the spirit shadow seemed to contain a wisp of void energy. It was ethereal and unpredictable, but also eternal and indestructible. Moreover, unlike the other spiritual clones, this battle shadow's eyes were closed the entire time and did not change at all because of Ouyangming's appearance. Ling Xiao frowned slightly, and he felt a trace of danger in his heart. Boom! Chapter 12:16. Buzz! The sound of a sword suddenly resounded between heaven and earth. Above the void, Ling Xiao held the sword in one hand and placed the other behind his back. His black robe was peerless, and he looked like an immortal. At this moment, there was no trace of emotion on his face. He was cold, calm, and gentle like jade. Even though the thousands of spiritual shadows had already arrived in front of him, he was still calm and unmoved. Then, he raised the long sword in his hand and gently slashed it down. Around him, endless sword radiance began to bloom, and layers of golden lotuses of the great path opened and closed. Suddenly, cold wind blew in all directions within the illusory wall, and it was as cold as winter. The whole world seemed to have frozen for a moment. Even the spiritual shadows on the other 8 battle paths stopped at this moment. Everything was silent and there was no sound. Clang! Then, an astonishing sword intent floated in the air. Ling Xiao's body seemed to be flickering with immortal light. His entire arm that was holding the sword turned jade-like at this moment, revealing a supreme divinity. Suddenly, a sea of blood floated in the void and corpses piled up. Everyone only saw a wisp of clear radiance passing by leisurely and turning into 3,000 sword intents. With an unparalleled momentum, it enveloped the thousands of spiritual shadows. Woo-woo-woo! A strange whimpering sound that seemed to penetrate through the ages resounded. In front of everyone's eyes, many immortal shadows appeared in the air. They were densely packed and gathered to form a long river of time, from their rise to their destruction. The emotions that were full of resentment and unwillingness inexplicably imprisoned heaven and earth, turning it into a tribulation intent. Unparalleled Tao resentment. This move was originally created by the Sky Demon when he was slaughtering the rebels. It could kill thousands of living beings with one slash, and it was also the strongest move that Ling Xiao had mastered. Although at this moment, he used the 3,000 fleeting moments to slash out this move, and it was more or less vast and mighty, but a group of spiritual shadows without spiritual intelligence. Even if they retained some of the power they had when they were alive, how could they resist the ancient resentment in this move? Buzz! The sword radiance pierced through the firmament like the first strand of immortal radiance in the depths of the primordial chaos. It destroyed heaven and earth, yin and yang, and the 6 paths of heaven and earth. At the same time, the fearless thousands of spiritual shadows that were still charging towards Ling Xiao were destroyed as well. Infinite slaughter. Boom boom. The thunderous sound of the great Tao reverberated throughout the 9 heavens. However, what shocked everyone was not the scene of the sword slaying 1,000 spirits. Instead, it was the calm and elegant figure in the void who kept his sword with his hands behind his back. There was still no change in his expression. His black robes fluttered in the wind, and his ink-black hair was tied up in a crown. It was a kind of otherworldly immortal aura. In front of him, layers of spiritual shadows shattered soundlessly and transformed into boundless spiritual radiance that covered the sky and the sun. In the space where the sword intent slashed through, countless phenomena rose and fell one after another. There were divine mountains collapsing, seas turning into mulberry fields, stars falling from the sky, and immortals being beheaded. Vaguely, it was like a painting of the cycle of epochs slowly unfurling before silently dispersing. Until the last spiritual shadow on the battle path quietly shattered. The spirit source Taoist rhyme that was scattered in the void suddenly turned into a beam of divine light, enveloping Ling Xiao's figure. At this moment, the young man's body was surrounded by 7-colored light. It made his already flawless face look even more handsome and charming. This is the legendary appearance of a perfected immortal? Although everyone knew about the legend of a perfected immortal, no one had ever seen a perfected immortal's charm with their own eyes. Ever since the Realm Lord used the immortal demon Ancient Bell to suppress Qingtsang, all the sects had been silently accumulating power. There had been no turmoil for 100,000 years. However, at this moment, looking at the young man in the void, there was only respect in everyone's hearts. Even people of destiny like Yang Yuan and Lu Ming felt deeply powerless. They did not even dare to have a trace of ambition to compete with him. However, just as everyone was shocked and their eyes were filled with fear, Ling Xiao's expression did not relax at all. Instead, it became even more serious. He lowered his head and looked at the peak of the battle path. For the first time, there was a hint of seriousness in his eyes. At this moment, he could see that the only figure on the battle path had slowly opened his eyes. What was different from the other spiritual shadows was that this pair of eyes contained a wisp of extreme fighting spirit. Jun Hanch. Although Ling Xiao had already guessed his identity, he was still shocked by the fighting spirit that this person exuded. It was a kind of terrifying fighting spirit that was immortal with heaven and earth. He stood there like an ancient god of war, giving people an inexplicable sense of oppression. However, this was just a remnant image, or rather, it was formed by a wisp of divine consciousness. Ling Xiao frowned slightly. He was even more curious about the identity of the person who ranked first on the ancient tablet. Who exactly was he? Why did even the sage realm Ling people, whose divine soul and memories were devoured by him, not know this name? Mysterious, powerful. Inexplicably, Ling Xiao felt a trace of unprecedented pressure. Even if he was able to look down on his peers in Qingtsong and even the masters of the immortal forces, given Ling Xiao's current means, he might not be unable to contend with them. However, this battle figure made him feel a faint sense of oppression. It was as if he was an old enemy. He did not enter the sequence and did not leave behind a great reputation. However, he suppressed thousands of talents and dominated the past and present. For a moment, Ling Xiao even suspected that this person might be related to the Realm Lord. After all, a monster that could suppress Gu Chaoxiai in terms of talent must be a truly terrifying existence in this world. However, with the identity of the Realm Lord, why would he leave his name here? Just as Ling Xiao was deep in thought, an ancient and domineering aura suddenly shot up from the peak of the battle path. It was a kind of domineering aura that dominated the world. In front of this aura, even Ling Xiao felt a trace of insignificance. This feeling was rare for the latter. After all, ever since Ling Xiao ascended to the upper realm, he had dominated the world. No one in the same realm as him could hurt him. Even Xuexian, the young lord of the Realm Lord Palace and the current sequence, if not for the protection of the immortal devil Ancient Bell, he would not be Ling Xiao's opponent. However, this spirit shadow, a mere spirit shadow, was able to make him feel pressured. Boom! Before Ling Xiao could react, divine light flashed in front of him. The spiritual image swept out like a ghost, instantly piercing through the sky and appearing in front of him. In an instant, space froze and time stopped. Ling Xiao could no longer hear any sound in his ears. Only the ear-piercing screech of space was left. At this moment, he could see that the spiritual image's eyes were extremely deep and cold, like a cold river in the 9 heavens, exuding extreme indifference. Around him, a strange and desolate aura circulated, forming a world of its own and enveloping an area of 100 feet. Under this aura, even Ling Xiao felt that his body and bloodline were showing signs of drying up. "Who exactly are you?" Ling Xiao said indifferently. Immortal light surged around him as spiritual fire and lightning alternated. A vast power of stars spread out, and a rich aura of life rose to the peak, trying to stop the strange aura. The entire space shook violently, shattering like ice crystals. The two invincible youths attacked at the same time. Even the illusory space seemed to be unable to withstand the pressure. It shook and wailed and could collapse at any time. Boom! Chapter 12:17. Die! The spiritual shadow spat out a simple word. As for his attack, it was extremely simple. With a single punch, 10,000 mammoths were destroyed. Even though Ling Xiao's physical body was comparable to a prime being's, his eyes flashed with surprise when he saw the spiritual shadow's fist shattering the void. This punch was enough to shatter the heavens, crack the earth, and destroy everything. Ling Xiao's eyes were clear as he slashed down with his sword. The monstrous sword essence instantly fluctuated like a falling galaxy, dazzling and dazzling. Boom! Boom! The two attacks contained extremely terrifying true meaning of the Great Tao. The moment they collided, the entire Battle Mountain Ancient Road was instantly destroyed. The countless spiritual shadows that were originally standing on top of it all collapsed at the same time, turning into spiritual light Taoist rhymes that covered the entire area. Oh no! Run! However, even though the creation was right in front of them, Yang Yuan, Shen Jing'an, and the others' expressions changed drastically when they felt the destructive aura surging in the void. Immediately, they no longer cared about the creation divine armaments and frantically fled toward the entrance of the Wall of Illusion. Amitabha! Yao Guang's eyes shone with golden light as thousands of Buddhas worshipped behind him. However, just as she was about to walk toward Ling Xiao, a low and gentle voice suddenly sounded in her ears. "You guys leave this place first." Hearing this, Yao Guang's expression turned serious, and his Buddhist nature quietly disappeared. Without any hesitation, he turned and left with Xianyuan Weiyang, who was rushing over from afar. Yao Guang, young master asked us to leave first. Yao Guang turned her head and took a deep look at the two figures standing in the sky with matchless divine might. In the end, she sighed softly and disappeared from where she stood with Xianyuan Weiyang. Only Gu Chaoxiai frowned slightly. Looking at the turbulent sea of Taoist rhymes and immortal opportunities above her head, her eyes trembled, but she did not flee in panic like the others. Since Ling Xiao was here, she would not go anywhere. No matter if it was dangerous or safe, she would not leave, and she hoped that he would not abandon her. With that thought in mind, Gu Chaoxiai actually sat down cross-legged on the spot. Clear radiance blossomed from her body, transforming into a pair of phoenix wings that covered the sky. The might of a dragon was vast and mighty. Then, she waved her jade-like hand and directly captured the spirit sea above her head, enveloping her. Boom, boom, boom. The wind and clouds within 10,000 miles suddenly changed, and an invisible great Tao opportunity fell from the sky. 7 colored rays of light shot up into the sky from the depths of the illusory wall, and the sound of Tao resounded. The celestial sound was vast and endless. Around Gu Chaoxiai, many mysterious phenomena started to appear. Divine Palace, epic starry sea. A tall mountain loomed over the horizon, and purple lightning poured down like a curtain. With the wings of the true dragon and immortal phoenix, he could soar millions of miles into the sky. Green lotuses broke through the soil and the flowers withered. Within a radius of 10,000 miles, the will of life and the will of death rose alternately. The originally shattered illusory world suddenly became still after everyone left. Then, at the peak of the sky, a giant sun appeared out of nowhere, shining with golden light. At the end of the earth, a crescent moon slowly rose from the east. It was flawless, bright, and eternal. Between heaven and earth, endless Tao intent evolved and intertwined, and the shackles of order were shattered. Only the beautiful figure in the phoenix robe sitting cross-legged at the peak of the mountain was calm and indifferent, and her eyes were closed. At this moment, the great rhythm of heaven and earth was on Gu Chaoxiai alone. In the void, Ling Xiao and the spiritual figure faced each other from afar. At this moment, neither of them was in a hurry to attack, but their eyes were filled with a strong fighting spirit. Ling Xiao lowered his head and glanced at the mountain peak where Gu Chaoxiai was, and raised his eyebrows slightly. At this moment, he could feel that the aura on this woman's body was becoming more and more terrifying. It was like a vast blue sea, and the waves were endless, making people feel small and insignificant. But, my wife, is it appropriate for you to hide at the foot of the mountain and eat alone while I fight to the death here? However, the golden providence above Gu Chaoxiai's head made Ling Xiao feel a little better. You play with the Tao and I play with you. Is this called comprehending deeply? The reason why the chaotic Tao law was ranked at the peak of the great Tao was that this Tao law originally had the terrifying power to evolve all things in the world. From the blue sky and bright sun to the vitality of plants and trees. Yin and yang, heaven and earth, life and death, and even the 8 desolates and 4 directions, and the epoch of time could all be born from the chaos. Thus, the peak of the great Tao was to form its own universe, be immortal, and control the power of the 6 paths. It was obvious that with Gu Chaoxiai's providence, she would step into the Dharch realm or even the immortal realm sooner or later. At that time, she would be able to create heaven and earth and destroy all things in the world with a single thought. Just thinking about this kind of power made one feel a little excited, and want to drink a few cups with her, and then have a deep discussion about the friendship between Guan and Bao. What? Wife, are you suspecting that I tampered with the wine again? All right, this time I'll drink first. What's going on? Why can't I see the space in the illusion wall? It seems to be covered by a wave of divine power. In the academy, the expressions of all the academy disciples changed drastically. Their eyes were filled with intense shock. Especially at this moment, the flawless rainbow divine light that filled the illusion wall contained an indescribable divine nature. It actually made many supremacy disciples understand, and their cultivation levels fluctuated. They almost broke through on the spot. The 4 academy masters' faces were also filled with shock. Even with their cultivation levels, they could not see the scene in the illusion wall at all. However, this rainbow divine light contained the aura of the peak of the great Tao. It could create and destroy all things. Is this the aura of the chaotic Tao? Li Rulin, the academy master's eyes trembled. Even his tone was inexplicably solemn. It's really a heavenly talent. I just don't know who is the one who released this aura. I didn't expect so many monstrous people to appear in the Daotian Academy in succession during the Academy Master's lecture this time. It's a pity that the ancient Tao tablet is broken, and the illusion wall is sealed. Our Academy has lost 2 great divine items in succession. There will be no more tablet trial in the Azure Sky Academy. However, the Academy Master should be happy. After all, the original intention of this trial is to help the human race prosper. Now that a heavenly talent has appeared, the human race has finally ushered in the best opportunity in the past 100,000 years. Buzz. Just as everyone in the academy was discussing animatedly, Ling Xiao looked indifferently at Gu Chaoci. In front of him, divine light bloomed around the spiritual figure's body again. Then, it threw out a simple punch again. A pitch-black and deep color lingered around the fist shadow. It was a desolate aura that made one's heart palpitate. At this moment, Ling Xiao only felt that the desolate aura swept over again. It encompassed the universe and intimidated the surroundings. This feeling was similar to the Buddha domain that Zhang Jiuji had used back then. However, the terrifying gravity of the Buddha domain could be resisted with one's physical body. However, the aura of the spiritual figure in front of him was difficult to resist. Even though Ling Xiao's body was flourishing with myriad Tao, he still felt that his spiritual power and blood qi were declining at an extremely slow speed. In fact, if it was any other Empyrean realm cultivator in the Azure Sky world, it would be difficult for them to resist this terrifying and strange power. Who exactly is this figure? Ling Xiao frowned slightly. For the first time, a gloomy expression appeared on his face. Then, he suddenly withdrew his ancient sword and dispersed his spiritual power. His eyes suddenly surged with a monstrous battle intent. Chapter 12:18. Buzz. The void shook, and layers of ripples covered the entire illusory space like waves. At this moment, Ling Xiao did not use any spiritual energy when facing Ling Yingying's punch. He only used his physical strength to meet Ling Yingying's punch. Not only had his physical body fused with 4 heavenly demon bones, but he had also refined 500 of the 3,000 sword bones. Moreover, he was wearing the unforgiven demonic armor. Not to mention, when Ling Xiao integrated the universe dragon soul, he used the power of the true dragon saint soul to refine his physical body for 49 days. With all these opportunities, his physical strength was comparable to a supreme being expert. And supreme being? Ling Xiao's eyes were cold. Or rather, Ling Ying was more terrifying than he expected. Every time Ling Xiao saw that cold, indifferent, and calm face before him, Ling Xiao always felt that he didn't seem to be a battle machine without any intelligence. Am I mistaken? But no matter what, if he couldn't destroy Ling Ying today, it would be a flaw in his Tao heart. Other people only had one Tao of invincibility, but Ling Xiao's Tao of invincibility was invincibility. Since you can crush people with your physical body, I'll crush you with my physical body and prove myself to be invincible. Buzz. Ling Xiao's sword intent sword. Even though he didn't use any spiritual energy, The sword intent around him was enough to shake heaven and earth. Boom! In the end, the two fists collided. Visible ripples in the void swept through the entire area. In front of them, a crack in space stretched for thousands of miles. It was the purest darkness in the world. But, just as Ling Xiao expected, his physical body was the best in the world. Even if Ling Ying was talented, he couldn't compete with him. But compared to ordinary azure sky prodigies, Ling Ying's physical strength was indeed shocking. He was only sent flying a few hundred feet away. The arm that collided with Ling Xiao didn't break at all. It only dimmed a little. "You're really strong." Ling Xiao's eyes were clear and cold, and his body began to emit a resplendent glow. These rays of light connected together and were completely compatible with his bone. It was the innate immortal rhythm contained within the 500 sword bones. The aura of the great Tao lingered in the sky as countless runes and ancient scriptures were imprinted on it. Ling Xiao did not give the spirit shadow any time to breathe as he struck out with his palm, crushing the world. 100-meter-long handprint descended from the sky, exuding a piercingly cold, immortal intent. Slay the immortals above, and punish the traitors below. Along the way there were countless divine shadows that appeared in the world. It was as if they had come from the ancient times and stood in front of the sword palm. Boom boom! Monstrous divine might swept out in all directions, and ripples spread out in all directions. The originally shattered space within the illusory wall was now crushed into powder like colored glass. Only Gu Chaoxiai's body seemed to be enveloped by an immortal aura, and it formed a universe of its own that completely resisted the terrifying might that surged over. Boom boom! The sword palm descended from the sky, although it did not contain a trace of spiritual power. However, this attack formed by the innate sword intent was undoubtedly even more terrifying. This was the first time Ling Xiao had fully displayed the might of the 500 sword bones. Under the sword palm, the light outside the spirit shadow's body also showed signs of dissipating. Then, he rose up against the sky and formed a seal with both his fists. Like a meteor, he furiously rushed toward the sword palm. Boom! Dazzling divine light instantly covered the sky. The entire illusory wall finally completely collapsed at this moment. However, just as the cracks in the void formed scars and spread out, a chaotic aura suddenly circulated around Gu Chaoxiai's body. In an instant, the shattered space was rapidly fusing together at a speed visible to the naked eye, and it was restored to its original state. Finally, the spiritual light between heaven and earth disappeared, and the spirit shadow's figure suddenly appeared above the void. At this moment, half of his body was already shattered, and only half of his head was left. However, he still stood in the sky, and his remaining eye revealed an inexplicable vicissitude of dominance. Buzz! At this moment, a ripple suddenly appeared in the space in front of him. Then, Ling Xiao's figure seemed to have stepped through time and space, and appeared in front of the spirit shadow. Behind him, a golden dragon shadow floated over. As he punched, the dragon shadow immediately hissed and turned into a 3-inch golden light that poured into his fist. Poochie! Without the slightest hesitation, he did not utter a single word of nonsense. As Ling Xiao's fist landed, it instantly pierced through the spirit shadow's body, and its soul consciousness was destroyed. But what was frightening was that a brilliant smile suddenly blossomed on Ling Ying's face. He looked at Ling Xiao calmly, and his remaining eye was filled with monstrous battle intent and endless Taoist rhymes. "I've finally waited for you. Waited for me." Ling Xiao's eyes narrowed slightly, and he slowly withdrew his fist, looking at the spirit shadow that was slowly dissipating. Suddenly, he realized that this person could not be the Realm Lord. If the Realm Lord knew of his existence and deliberately hid in the dark to set up a trap, he would not expose his intentions at this time. The sentence, "I've finally waited for you," was more like a kind of provocation, a kind of unresigned obsession. "I'll be back and we'll meet soon." Who are you? Me. The spirit shadow lowered his head and looked at Gu Chao Si on the mountain peak in the distance. There seemed to be some doubt in his eyes. I'm a passerby of the eternal world, the first immortal in 100,000 years. Boom! The moment the spirit shadow finished speaking, his figure suddenly shattered, turning into mottled light and completely dissipating. Ling Xiao stood in the void and fell into deep thought. A passerby of the eternal world, the first immortal in 100,000 years? With Jun Hanch's strength, when he was in the venerable realm, a spirit shadow could compete with him, the reincarnation of the sky demon. One could imagine how terrifying his real body was, but it was impossible for such a person to remain unknown. Even if he was an expert from 100,000 years ago, Ling Xiao should have heard of him. The first immortal in 100,000 years. Ling Xiao did not know how much of this title was exaggerated. After all, the destined people were all arrogant, domineering, and invincible. But why was he waiting for him? Would they meet soon? Could it be that the spirit shadow's real body was not in the azure world? Ling Xiao's eyes gradually turned cold, but his heart was filled with emotions. Since the upper realm, he had not felt out of control for a long time. The unknown hatred, the sudden revelation of the secrets of heaven and earth. Even if he was careful at every step and treated the world as a chess piece, now it seemed that he was not necessarily not a chess piece in someone else's chess game. One's vision was always proportional to one's strength. What Ling Xiao had always been doing was jumping out of the overall situation of heaven and earth and accumulating strength in secret. In this way, even if one day, the fog dispersed and the real chess player appeared, Ling Xiao would still have the power to overturn the 9 heavens and 10 earth. In the end, whether it was Ling Tian, Chen Qingshan, Bai Ling, Lin Meng, Su Yan, or the other girls, they were just Ling Xiao's means to set up heaven and earth and plot against the 9 heavens. He scattered them in the dark and developed them. One day, when danger came, there would be people who were willing to die, making him immortal. In these 9 heavens, the name Ling Xiao should be revered. But if Jun Hanch was the strongest immortal in 100,000 years, did it mean that the sky demon had already died in that era? Chapter 12-19 Variables. Ling Xiao lowered his head and looked at the fragmented cracks in the void and the crisscrossing chaos Dao intent. There was a rare solemn look in his eyes. As his cultivation level increased, a corner of the great mystery of heaven and earth was finally revealed. A passerby in the mortal world, an immortal in the 9 heavens. No matter who his opponent was, Ling Xiao was naturally fearless. After all, there was no one in this world who had a more terrifying background than him. Even if someone was secretly controlling everything, Ling Xiao still had methods that they could not understand at all. System. Forging the heavenly will, seizing opportunities, and adding unlimited point. When Ling Xiao, the first primordial demon, achieves the heavenly will body, this immortal path would probably enter a different period of brilliance. I use the heavenly will as my servant and the heavenly Tao as my contract. With a wave of my hand, I should be able to slaughter the world. If the most powerful person in this world was not him 100,000 years later, did it mean that he had perished at the peak of his Tao path? Was this the ending that the sky demon should have after being reborn, or was this the ending after he transmigrated? Buzz. In the end, Ling Xiao did not think too much. Instead, he descended from the sky and sat cross-legged beside Gu Chao Si. He devoured all the Taoist runes and divine armaments that were gathered by her chaos Tao into his body. In the end, the opportunities of heaven and earth were ever-changing. Only strength was the foundation of variables. This illusory space was on the verge of shattering. If not for Gu Chao Si's terrifying Tao laws, these Taoist runes would have dissipated long ago. Even so, it was impossible for her to merge all 10,000 top-notch geniuses' spirit clones with her own strength. Yes, sharing honor and disgrace. Buzz. Gu Chaoci seemed to have felt the changes in the spirit aura around her. She frowned slightly and looked at Ling Xiao indifferently. The corners of her mouth seemed to curl up into a smile. Suddenly, the entire illusory space was silent. Only the two figures sitting cross-legged on the mountain peak were shrouded in thousands of rays of light. They were like an immortal couple, otherworldly and otherworldly. At the same time, in the Daotian Academy, one figure after another passed through the gate of immortality and walked into everyone's sight. However, at this moment, the expressions of all the Academy elders were somewhat gloomy and grave. For the human race, the destruction of two great trial treasures was a blessing. With such a prodigy, the human race had finally ushered in an opportunity to revive. But for the Daotian Academy, it was a loss of foundation, and it was showing signs of decline. Unfortunately, the main culprit was the young master of the Ling people. As such, no matter how much resentment they had, they could only grit their teeth and swallow it. That's right. As the hope of the human race, it is an honor for all of you to pass the 3 trials and enter the academy. Dao Shenji, the master of the Dao Academy, took a step forward and looked coldly at the prodigies before him. He nodded slightly. The Daotian Academy is dedicated to the revival of the human race. Our goal is to nurture the true backbone of the human race. Since you have the talent, you should abandon all distracting thoughts and focus on the Tao. Having no desires or thoughts is the essence of the Tao. As soon as Dao Shenji's voice fell, a wisp of complicated bitterness appeared on the faces of many disciples, and they immediately frowned. Bah! What do you mean by no desires or thoughts? Are you going to say something about the heartless Tao again? Beside him, Zhong Tu, the master of the Array Academy, sneered with a mocking expression. I see that the young master of the Ling people and Gu Chaoci have also not cultivated the heartless Tao. Let me ask you, how many people in the Azure continent can stand shoulder to shoulder with them? You! Dao Shenji was momentarily speechless, not knowing how to refute. That's right. The heartless Tao was the ultimate truth of the path to immortality. The original intention was to abandon all distracting thoughts and focus on the Tao. Only by having no desires or thoughts could one reach the peak. But now, Ling Xiao had ascended to the divine Tao, shattered the God monument, and broken the illusion. Such a magnificent feat could be said to be unparalleled in history. It was truly a feat that no one had ever done before, and no one would be able to do it in the future. After all, even if there were people with unparalleled talent later on, they would not have a chance. The monument wall had already shattered, so how could they break it? You few, if any of you are interested in the Array Tao, you can come to the Array Academy for a discussion. Zhong Tu's gaze paused for a moment on Xianyuan Weiyang before he turned and led the disciples of the Array Academy behind him away. Ha ha, all of you have passed the trial today, and are the top of the generation. The Daotian Academy has always been indiscriminate in our education. No matter where you are from, as long as you are willing to enter the academy, you can do so. Jichu, Li Rulin smiled faintly. His elegance made him look extraordinary. However, at this moment, Li Jichu looked inexplicably disappointed and absent-minded. Oh? Jichu? Senior sister, Master is calling for you. Lu Ming frowned slightly and gently touched Li Jichu's arm. The latter was stunned and bowed in a panic. Yes, disciple. Lead the senior brothers and senior sisters to the Hanlin Academy. That will be their temporary lodging. Yes. Li Jichu nodded slightly. The loneliness on her face disappeared as she smiled faintly. Unfortunately, with their standpoints, there will be a life-and-death battle in the end. Otherwise, the human race would really have a chance to revive. Hongguji took a deep breath. His eyes were full of vicissitudes. Ever since Wunren Zhiga died at the hands of the Sky Demon, he had not appeared in the academy for a long time. Unexpectedly, in just a few months, the young master of the Ling people has become famous in the Qing-Tsang continent. As expected, he is righteous. He should be invincible in the world. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.